How often have you read the news in the last few years and said to yourself, you can't make this shit up? It happens to me all the time. More and more something will happen and I will think satire is dead. This is so ridiculous that you can't possibly make a parody out of this. Well, these are the times. And one way to react to it would be just to tune out. That's kinda what I've done. I haven't watched news television in a decade and I avoid the news and try to shut myself out. I'm not an active journalist anymore, so I can do that. But how do journalists cope? Don't they get tired day after day chasing the truth when no one seems to care about the truth? Doesn't outrage fatigue affect them as well? Maybe one way to fight the apathy and to do work that matters is to follow the advice my guest today once gave on Twitter. Stay mad, that's the only way.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Scene and the Unseen. My guest today is Manisha Pande, the managing editor at News Laundry and the host of the incredible show TV News Sense, which she describes as, quote, a show that looks at all the insanity that passes off at news on Indian TV. Stop, good, it's a brilliant show. She's funny, she's brilliant, she's sharp, she's angry, she's analytical, she's a gift to Indian journalism. There's this old saying about how the world is a tragedy for those who feel and a comedy for those who think. Both categories of people need Manisha Pande. But hey, what am I doing? I doubt she needs any introduction for any of you, so let's just get straight to the conversation. Hey, the music started and this sounds like a commercial, but it isn't. It's a plea from me to check out my latest labor of love, a YouTube show I am co-hosting with my good friend, the brilliant Ajay Shah. We've called it Everything is Everything. Every week, we'll speak for about an hour on things we care about, from the profound to the profane, from the exalted to the everyday. We range widely across subjects and we bring multiple frames with which we try to understand the world. Please join us on our journey and please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. The show is called Everything is Everything. Please do check it out. Manisha, welcome to The Scene and the Unseen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we start, I'm going to embarrass you by saying I've just been your fanboy for the longest time and absolutely love Nuisance, of course, but also all of the other work you do and everything you guys do at News Laundry is just fantastic.
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you. And coming from you, it's a huge compliment because I love Seen and the Unseen. It's, I think I don't listen to much, podcasting, but it's one of the few podcasts that I listen to and I am a deep fan of yours too. So, mutual
Thank you so
admiration.
Thank you so much. We can stop now. Achievement has been unlocked. Everything is done. There's no reason to go on. But what is the stuff that has been happening recently with the government going after influencers? Like, I just really found it
Fascinating.
fascinating, hilarious, and it's not just that they decided to go after it, but they did like a hardcore push for it.
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
not like one or two people, matlab, and how come no one approached
In
you?
fact, we've just. No, so you know what? The first thing that happened was, I think it was Bharat Jodo Yatra. And Rahul Gandhi, we had approached Rahul Gandhi for an interview. And their team had very clearly said that you can get the interview, but you can't discuss politics. So we were like, then what's the point? What do we talk about? So then we said, obviously, we can't do that. But then we saw the series of interviews that he did with influencers. He had Samdesh walking alongside. He had Curly Tails. Then he had Kunal also, I think, at one point, where he wasn't really talking about politics. He was talking about what he felt about the country, his life, and, fluff stuff, basically. We got a glimpse of him, but you couldn't really challenge him in the way that journalists would. And I think that really ticked with a lot of people. And then you saw BJP do this counter push. And in fact, we've done a story today which explains that it's not just the center, state governments, Rajasthan government, Madhya Pradesh government. They're meeting local influencers, doing meetups with them. And it's really the next frontier for them because for Congress, it makes sense because they don't get any space on mainstream media or opposition. So if you want your word in, and I think for Rahul Gandhi also, he's probably very scarred still with that Arnab interview, which really went haywire for him. But yeah, so the opposition, I think, wanted to get a space for themselves where, they'd at least get heard without being called Tukde Tukde Gang or whatever. And I think for the BJP, it's just you've taken over TV media, most of it. So the next frontier is, YouTube. But I think which is what is really troublesome about this whole thing is, we reached out to Beer Biceps and asked him because there was a disclaimer that said that this is an arrangement with MyGov. And we asked him, what does this arrangement mean? Was there a, monetary exchange? And he said, no, but they paid for my flight and my tickets and loosely logistics. So we don't know what those logistics are. But, if as a journalist I'm interviewing anyone, I'm not going to get them to pay for my tickets or my stay or anything. And if I do, then I'd have to put that out as a disclaimer because that means that, I'd probably go soft on it or whatever because it's essentially then a promotion thing. And you don't have any of that in some of what these influencers are doing. So for me, actually, it raises questions of transparency because audience needs to know what the arrangement is. So you can do that fluff interview if you want and you can, ask them what are your hobbies or, what do you think about, some fluff questions like what do you think about tourism in India? I think that was one of the questions that came up. That's all fine. But I think it needs to come with a disclaimer for your audience. They need to know where you're coming from. So, yeah.
I used to be really skeptical of, celebrity endorsements back in the day and influencer marketing now because I would think, it's all shallow stuff. No one takes it seriously. Engagement is low. But I've changed my mind on that, especially when, I read this great book called Wanting by Luke Burgess. He was also on my show. And he spoke there about the core idea by his hero, the philosopher René Girard, where René Girard talks about what he calls mimetic desire. And the central thesis there is that most of us want something because other people want it, right? It's just that. So agar mujhe Mercedes chahiye ya gari chahiye, or if I'm a young person and I'm thinking ki theek hai, aage jaake I'm going to get married and have kids, and none of those may be intrinsic needs. You see it around you, those are the things to want and therefore you want them. And listening to those guys on podcasts, reading up more on that, I've kind of realized that mimetic desire is incredibly powerful. It is most of desire. So when your mimetic role model, so to say, which all will tend to be famous people, when they recommend something or when they seem to do something, it is so powerful. And what really gets my goat more and more is that we see all these influencers around us today. They are not at all discerning about what they are peddling.
Yeah.
Right? So like back in the early days of Seen Unseen, one Ayurvedic company came to me and said, can we sponsor? And were a little surprised when I said no, But these guys, they don't care. Any random crypto shit, any random finance scam kind of thing, they'll just kind of peddle it out there and have no thoughts about it. And
it's just content, no? It's just like, where's my next content? Where's my next piece of content that I can churn? And there's rarely, if you look at these interviews, they're painful to watch, And I say that as someone who watches a lot of television news. I was like, okay, this I'm not doing. Because it's painful to see the ignorance of the influencers. Like you said, some of the questions come from such deep space of ignorance that it's just painful to watch that. And then for that to have access to the union ministers, it's a very strange kind of a mix. But yeah.
And the bizarre thing is that at least with journalists, like not that, there's any sense of values in our profession, but at least with journalists, you can say, hey, this is what you should do. If they paid for your flight, you should put a disclosure. Yeah. But there's nothing like that for influencers, right? It's just a completely open, unmapped territory. And typically I would have imagined that it's okay. If you're a influencer who is doing shit like that, then your credibility gets affected. People engage with you on a shallow level. They don't take you seriously. So it's fine. In the long run, it kind of, everything finds its own level. But I'm just getting increasingly pessimistic about that because what is also happening is that the government has decided that everything is a narrative battle. And rather than media, you go directly to influencers and creators. They're actually right. Those guys are more effective.
That's true. And I think you have rules now when you're promoting something on Instagram, at least I know, right? You have to write sponsored.
Yeah, if even YouTube has a rule that if there's a video sponsor, you have to...
But what do you do when you're, this is such a gray area. What do you do? Where is the disclaimer when you're promoting an ideology? Or, okay, ideology is a bit vague, but a party or a person or a politician. And especially if there's money exchanged, I think you definitely need disclaimers for that. And it is very powerful, because if you look at the comments below some of these interviews, like a Jay Shankar, that message that we have this foreign minister who's finally putting India on the map, it's drilled into you through that in a very easy, fluffy way. But the the nature of the podcast or the interview really allows them to do that, the government. And then you have little sleek shots cut out of it, reels cut out of it, and stuff like that. So it's very powerful. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think Jaishankar had this video with tequila triceps, and tequila triceps is fawning admiration.
There's a tequila
He was-
triceps?
No,
Oh.
it's
I was a bit worried. I was like, beer ke baad tequila triceps.
only you can make fun of people or what? Though obviously I'm not as good at it as you. But yeah, okay, that was really flat. But yeah, but the fawning admiration of these influencers,
Yeah.
and the point is, it doesn't really make a difference, because if you look at, without my taking names, if you look at some of the other guests these people have on, they're just all kinds of kooks peddling all kinds of theories.
Yeah.
But what I really like is, what I did a couple of years back was I decided I need to check out this hardcore right-wing YouTube and all that. I didn't want it to mess up my algorithm, so I opened incognito window, new Gmail account, went deeply into that. Now, I have two separate YouTubes. There is no overlap. But the good thing is, in that right-wing ecosystem, there are a whole bunch of podcasts and show hosts and all that. And they must have imagined in their heads कि जब मोदी जी आएंगे तो हमारे पास आएंगे. And instead, they've been completely bypassed
And gone to
they've
these
gone-
completely guys who had nothing to do at all with.
Yeah, so that's also in a sense it's kind
It's
of
sad.
delicious.
It's sad.
So let's sort of get to talking about you. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Okay. Childhood is it's not the most easiest thing for me to talk about, but my father's in the army. I grew up all over India, mostly till 9th standard. I was in Chandigarh, and then a lot of my formative years from 9th standard onwards was in Chandigarh. So there were two things happening during, and I think it really shaped a huge part of who I am. And I usually never talk about this, but if you ask me a question on my childhood, it's very difficult for me to not address some issues and just talk about my schooling or my teachers. So two things. I think one was that growing up as an army kid, there was a lot of moving, right? So we were moving from Binagudi to Shimla to Udaipur. And my mother made it a point to make sure that I never go to an army public school. Because she was like, you can't turn into this army brat who thinks all that there is to life is an army cantonment, and you only meet people who are in the army. So she really wanted me to go to a public school. As a result of which, what happened was that every 2.5 years, I would move to a new school. I'd have to break into friendships. You have friends already formed, and children can be very mean, I think. When you as a young person, when you move into a new place, you already have groups formed, cliques formed, and you're this new odd girl who's trying to come and fit in, and then finally you fit in, and then you have to leave, and all your friendships break, and then you write sad letters to your ex-friends that I really miss you in my new place. So I think that but I think at some point you kind of become cool with it. I think after a point I really started seeing myself as this rootless hippie. Everyone has this story that is boring. They're just born and brought up in one place, and they have this linear, whereas I have traveled all over and whatever. So I kind of exoticized it and came to terms with it. The other thing is slightly trickier for me to talk about, because I had a sibling who passed away about 12-15 years ago. And he was someone who was dealing with drug addiction for a very long time. So I think I was in 4th and he was in 12th. And that's when his first sort of bout with addiction began. Yeah, so I was in 4th, he was in 12th. And I think his first sort of, I don't know how to put it, but I mean, the beginning of it was basically back then we were in Shimla. And I pretty much then kind of grew up seeing him struggle till a very late stage and succumbing to it ultimately. So I think for growing up for me, that was a huge part of my reality. And remember, this is the 90s when you can't, drug addiction is a huge taboo even today. People don't want to talk about it. But back then, even more so, because you didn't have the internet, you didn't have kind of access to pop culture or stuff like that where people are openly talking about it. So it was something that had to be dealt with at home, that had to be lied about, or that had to be kind of brushed under the carpet. And I think a lot of my beginning early memories were kind of leading this dual kind of a life where I knew there was something happening at home and it was hard. It was hard on everyone. And then there was this outside going to school, making friends, being all, everything is great kind of a thing. So that really defined for me a large part of my youth also. As a result of which, I don't really talk about this much, but I do when I do. And I kind of rationalized it in my head, funnily, with this theory as a kid that, a lot of people, life is divided into these two acts, basically, that you have a childhood and you have an adulthood. And those who have not the typical happy, childhood life eventually end up having great adulthood. So I just kind of said that, okay, this is all shit, but it's going to get really good ahead. So yeah.
That's a good way to deal with it. I'm so sorry to hear that. One of the things that often interests me is how people kind of fit in, because growing up we have this perpetual anxiety of you want the validation of your peers, you want their respect, all of that. And I would imagine that for an army kid that could be even tougher. Like typically how I would imagine is that how you make friends is that you are who you are and you're in a particular school, and over time you fit in and then you have your own little group, and that kind of moves on. But if you're moving all the time, if you're moving every couple of years as you were, for some people who are outgoing, it might be easy to kind of make new friends and all that. For some people who are not so outgoing, you could just like get into a shell and it could be much harder. And some people build up defense mechanisms. Like I did an episode with Chuck Gopal, the creator, and he told me about how in his college he just felt like a complete misfit and didn't know what to do. And then he realized that making PJs was a way to fit in, if I remember correctly. So he became known as a guy with PJs, and that's how he kind of, So it's like you build a kind of a persona, but you realize that works, and it goes with that. And there's also a great term I learned recently called the looking glass self, about how we are shaped by the reflections of others. And this becomes really complicated because, especially when we are young, there is often no self-reflection. You're not really thinking about what do I really want to be? Why do I do the things I do or want the things I do? And if you are in good company, that's great. Some of it reflects back on you. You want their admiration, so you behave in those ways. And sometimes you don't. And like you said, kids can often be cruel. Kids can often be shallow. So when you think about sort of the shaping of the self, how was that like for you? Like, were you naturally somebody who could make friends easily, or did it have to be an intentional effort? If it was an intentional effort, were there like tactics? How did you put yourself out there?
I think I was naturally good at speaking with people. I was into a lot of like declamation, debates, theater, that kind of stuff. So instantly that became my way of making friends. But I think, there's always this first day of school. I still remember, even now when I look at kids go to school in the morning, if I ever wake up that early and I see kids standing at a bus stop, I just feel really traumatized. I just feel really sad that poor kids, they have to go through. And, for a lot of people, they miss their childhood or they romanticize it and they say, oh, I wish I could just go back to school. For me, it was never like that. And I still feel like shit, so sad. Kids are going to school. But anyway, for me, no, I think I was good at making friends. I was good at putting up an act. I could be very confident even if I'm really worried whether the other person will like me or not. I would always prepare a bunch of conversation starters, which I think I still do. I think that habit has still stayed on with
You
me.
got any examples?
From school.
Or from anywhere?
No, I mean, just simply, if even today, if I'm at a party or if I'm at a place where I don't know anyone at all, I would think of 3 or 4 things that I'd just rehearse it in my head before I approach the person. So I think I did that. And of course, then you made friends and all that. And I think then the hard part was leaving the friendships that you make finally and then starting all over again. But I mean, it sounds tragic, but I guess I mean, I think maybe I'm making it more than what it was, because a lot of kids in the army do kind of have to have this system of, you know, moving from one place to the other. So at that time, it was a huge thing in my head. So yeah.
One of the sort of not a TIL, but a striking sort of observation about someone that came up during the episode with your colleague Abhinandan was when he said that he hasn't made any new friends after 25. And that struck me because so many of my guests say exactly the opposite. And I say exactly the opposite because
Yeah, I made a lot of friends after 25. I think some of the friends that I'm in touch with today and I consider close or I talk to on a daily basis are actually my friends from after 25, or maybe from a few from 20s, maybe like college. But school friends, rarely. I'm not really that in touch with. Also because of the nature of, what it was, just moving on.
yeah, I mean,
So you forget also as a kid, no? Then you move on after 1 year and then you just forget all your best friends and you make new best friends.
and also
So-
we are exactly, I think, in that generation, I'm probably the early part of the generation or the later part of it, where the internet was a transitory point, right? So when I look at a significant part of my life till I was an adult, you had to deal with you had to be part of communities of circumstance. So you go to school somewhere, you live somewhere, maybe you work somewhere, and those are all communities of circumstance, and that's your sample size for meeting people and making friends. But then the internet happens, and you can now form communities of choice where you can meet like-minded people and everything kind of just opens up. Did the internet kind of flow naturally into your lives, or do you remember it as something that actually came in, it changed the way you did things, it made a big difference?
I think, in fact, now that you're talking about friendship and all that, I think, yeah, the first thing that internet did for me was the realization that you could talk to some total stranger on a Yahoo chat engine, or you could make friends with someone on Orkut or High Five. I think before Orkut, you had High Five. So that, I think it opened that up. And I remember going to cyber cafes, talking to my internet friends. And yeah, I mean, in that way, it changed. I think I must have been eighth standard is when I think the internet thing would have come. It come into our lives, and you had cyber cafes as a phenomena where you'd spend 2 to 3 hours. Music, I was really into music. So for me, internet also meant that I could search for all the songs that I can't go to Planet M, or albums that I can't find in Planet M or Music World. So that also became a thing for me. I mean, the impact that, if I recall from internet for me, would be, making friends, chatting with complete strangers, and music.
What kind of music were you into?
Okay, so my music journey was, for the longest time, I think till 18, 19, it was just rock and roll. So 60s, 70s, started with The Doors, Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, Bad Company, discovered Bob Dylan, then got stuck to that, Lynyrd Skynyrd, so stuff like that. And, back then you would go to, you discover Bob Dylan, so you listen to the essential hits. Then you go to Planet M, you find like Highway 61 Revisited, you won't find Blonde on Blonde. So then you go on the internet looking for, all the albums. So that kind of stuff. I think at least till my first year, I thought music meant 60s and 70s. That's it. And Cat Stevens was, I think, my end point. After that, then I moved on to Hindi music.
Yeah, and you bringing memories back. Not Blonde on Blonde, Highway 61, Blood on the Tracks was my favorite Dylan album, which was, and I remember back in the days in the 80s, early 90s, just scrambling. It's such an achievement to get a mixtape together, and now it's kind of.
I used to love making those for my friends, like on TDK. I still remember, like, we used to get TDK cassettes and then press play and record play together and make a mixtape.
Yeah. So, as you were, going through school, going through college, what did you want to do? Like, what was your sense of who you are, what you want to do?
Yeah, I thought of this recently because there's a CSDS survey that's come out recently. It's interviewed about 200 journalists. And nearly half of them have said that they want to leave journalism, which is a very alarming figure. Career switch or just completely leave. And I was just discussing this with friends, and I was like, actually, I'm not surprised. And I really wonder why I stuck around, And we were wondering, like, why a lot of us stuck around. I've been a journalist for 14 years now, which made me think, like, why did I become a journalist in the first place? And I think the answer was that I wanted to be a writer. And for a long time, because of, everything that was happening at home, I felt I really went into books. And I would read a lot. And I also, along with rationalizing, what I told you earlier about life being divided into two acts, I also felt like all this struggle or whatever was happening because I would use it as material and become some great writer, because all writers go through pain and then they, turn it into some gold which would be read for centuries and centuries. So I really fancied myself as a writer. Of course, grief or sadness is not the only thing you need to be a writer. You also need talent, so, which I didn't have to be a writer. So the next best thing was journalism. But I think my early memory would be, and even before I had a sense of what I want to be, I would just type a lot. I would just pretend like I'm typing. Sometimes, because that time you had those landline phones, so sometimes I would type on the phone pad, pretending like I didn't know what I was writing or I didn't know what what I was doing, but I just liked the idea of typing a lot. So I think I fancied myself as a writer for a long time. Then I wanted to be an actor in college. Till I got really scared of what acting meant, because I did a couple, I was hugely into theater, and doing plays was exhilarating, but it also came with this huge down. Every time a play would get over, there would be this, big lull and big sadness, and that kind of scared me. That okay, this is a hard life. And of course, acting also meant, of course, I wouldn't. A lot of my friends actually went on to do things in Bollywood, but I knew that that's not my thing. So it had to be stage. That's again a life of struggle, because you go to NSD and sort of whatever. So I chose the easiest. It's like writer nahi ban sakte, actor nahi ban sakte, journalist ban jate.
Yeah, and
The most easy choice.
And regarding sort of using your pain for your art, I remember when I was 11 or 12, I had a simultaneous hernia and tonsillitis operation, and I was feeling completely miserable lying there in bed. And those days, the author I was into was Dostoevsky. So I remember my dad coming and saying that this is good for you. Do you want to write like Dostoevsky? Enjoy this pain. Use this pain. You can become India's Dostoevsky, etc., which of course I didn't. And that was kind of... And I also, that's a lovely image of, where you mentioned that you're sitting on a landline pretending to type. And, I had Nilanjana Roy on the show about a year back. And we were chatting about the urge to write. And we were talking about thin desires and thick desires, and thin desires being relatively superficial and not really intrinsic to you, mimetic desires, and thick being like really core to you. Writing can straddle both. You can have the thin desire ki validation chahiye. I want to be seen as a writer, and Booker Prize jeetenge. And it's in a sense that thin desire that makes you type on the phone. But there's also the thick desire where you just love writing. When you get hooked onto it, you love telling stories. You love like creating a life out of nothing, as it were. And I often think about how we should never mock someone with a thin desire, because what it can lead to is a kind of a learning and a self-fulfillment which takes you down the thicker path that, almost like you fake it till you make it. And did you daydream?
I don't know, but just on your previous point, do writers immediately, I mean, I don't know, do they take a pen and just start writing? Like, the need to write. Is that what you mean when you say that the thick desire means that even if you don't want to, you just have to sort of, that's the only way you can express yourself? And those are the guys who become big finally? Like, do you think all the classics and everything were written by people who just couldn't do anything but write?
I think, just thinking aloud, I think what it would be is that you might be attracted to like 10 glamorous things. Right, like tennis dekha, Wimbledon dekha, so let me try that. And then you watch something else and let me try that. And I guess there's also an intersection of what you're attracted to and what you're actually good at. And sometimes, And the weird thing about doing anything is that no matter what you do, you will suck at it at the start.
Yeah.
It is just doing it endlessly, which kind of makes you good. Which is, I keep telling my writing students that if you write something and you think it sucks, that is not a reason to stop, it is a reason to continue. Because it means your judgment is ahead of your ability and you'll eventually get there. But the point is that I think a certain amount of self delusion is perhaps necessary, because if all of us could see how bad we were
Confidence.
when we start something, why would we continue?
Yeah.
So, did you?
On daydreaming, no, I don't. I would talk a lot to myself, not daydream, but I would talk a lot to myself. I would talk a lot to like imaginary people, sometimes important people. I would take their interviews.
Like,
I don't know, like some actor, or even sometimes, like I'm talking about very young, a teacher, in my class who I don't like or who's tormented me. I would do like an interview with her in my head. so I would talk a lot, but not daydream so much, no. But I think a lot of kids do that. I don't know. I think a lot of kids do kind of talk to themselves.
and how was journalism school?
How was journalism school? This was IIMC in Dhenkanal. At that time, you only had two IIMCs, one in Delhi and one in Odisha. I don't think I learned anything in the institute, because I don't think you can learn much. Journalism is not something that you can really learn in a school. However, I do think that, there are colleges that teach you at least the basics of writing, what it is to be a journalist, what is news, what makes a news. I don't think IIMC in Odisha was really equipped for that. You had just one teacher who was taking all the classes. But I think what was interesting was to be placed in Odisha. That I wouldn't have been there in that space at all. And that year, there were the Kandhamal riots there. So that, and there was flooding also massively, I remember. So we got to kind of acquaint ourselves with this reality that we wouldn't have had I been in Delhi. So that was exciting. It was a beautiful campus. Got a lot of time to kind of, read and talk a lot to your campus, colleagues, because there was nothing else to do. All you did was sit down and chat. And I think that was also the year of 2611. I still very clearly remember being in the hostel, switching on the TV in the beginning and seeing what's happening. And then we were just glued to it through the day. So, yeah, but I don't think it prepared me at all for what journalism is. Not at all. And I got picked up from the campus by Business Standard and had like zero inclination, in economic journalism or even business journalism at all, but got picked up right from there. So I just kind of went from there to Business Standard and then just kind of, did stuff ahead. But in terms of training me for journalism, everything I had to learn on the job, like from what it is to make a page to what it is to sub a copy. I'd have my bosses tell me that, you're worse than a barber, you don't know how to cut a copy, stuff like that. I was terrible. I realized how bad my language was when, my boss would kind of edit stuff. So I learned a lot purely on the job. I don't think I was aware of anything at all before that, and IIMC didn't prepare me for much. And in fact, I thought I was very good. Like in journalism school, I thought मैं तो बहुत अच्छा लिखती हूँ, I'm the best. So I was quite confident of who I was and completely dropped in Business Standard.
And there are so many different aspects to learning journalism in the sense that you can think of it as a job. You got to report the news. Maybe you're good at writing. You think, I'll enjoy that. I can craft together a report, blah, blah, blah. At one point, you were writing about the very complex situation about people in the Republic who were, leaving it, and people were asking, why did they even work there and all that. And at that point, you spoke about how for so many people, journalism is really just a job. You're a deskie, you're a reporter, you're a production assistant. You do your work, you get your pay, you get the hell out of there. And that is one way to look at it, that okay, I am good at something, it is a functional skill, and I have a job where I'm being paid to do it, and that's what I do. And that's one way to look at it. And I guess another way to look at it is to be more idealistic about it and have a conception that there is a particular kind of work I want to do, not just in the quality of the craft, but where it is leading to in terms of, the kind of stories you cover and how you cover them. So how was your sense of yourself as a journalist? Because I imagine you get into it, you're a creative person, you're doing theater, you want to write, you're doing all of these things. So initially, I guess it is that creative impulse, writing impulse that
Yeah.
gets you in. But how does it begin to deepen? And when you look around you, then is it then disillusioning to see that for so many people it is just, purely functional and they don't maybe care the way you do?
Yeah. So, um, in fact, when I was about to join IIMC, I spoke to one of my relatives who was in broadcast. And he asked me, like, why do you want to be a journalist? I said, because I love to write. And he said, okay, but that's got nothing to do with journalism. Do you like news? Are you a news junkie? I was like, yeah, okay, I like news. So, yeah, you're very right. Like, I came to it from a very, from this theater background and from this love to write and love to read. And then landing myself in a job where, you're making pages every day. For the first 1 year, that's all I had to do. I just had to sit and make pages on the op-ed. I had to make sure that it's out at 6:30 p.m. It could not get later than that. I was editing letters to the editor, and I would suck at even that. I mean, according to my boss, I would be, rogered over even editing letters to the editor. Ki tum ye nahi kar sakti to aur kya karogi? Giving headlines, giving captions, being really unhappy actually for that first 1 year because, firstly, I started off on a salary of maybe like 14,000 or something like that. And maybe after my 3 years in business standard, I would have gotten 24,000 or something like that. And this was 2008, 9, where the slowdown had started having, you were hearing of layoffs, you were hearing of salary cuts. And actually, so many things come to me now. But one was that the salary was always very low. And you were kind of doing this work, for me at least, I couldn't understand the point of what I was doing because I wasn't interested in business. I wasn't interested in economic journalism. I wanted to write. But of course, and this is the hard thing that journalism students should realize, you are not going to land into a newsroom and start writing beautifully from the very first day. You're going to have this huge reality check where your bosses will say, side पे बैठो पेज बनाओ या यहाँ पे जाके देखो कि म्यूनसिपैलिटी में ये क्यों नहीं हुआ है या ये क्राइम स्टोरी करो या whatever. So that was happening, and there was a lot of dissatisfaction in the newsroom also, if I remember now, because at that point what was happening, there were pay cuts, there were layoffs. This is the impact of 2008-9. We were hearing, not just in business standard but in the industry, we were hearing of mass layoffs. And in business standard, we would always cover stuff like, what's happening in the SME sector, how many people laid off from this sector, how many people laid off from IT. And I think that is one of the reasons why I eventually ended up in News Laundry, because we would be putting all this story to pages on pages and talking about it. And then we would have discussions on, but this is also happening to us. And there's no space for our stories. The only organization that was doing it back then was the Hoot, which we would read, and we would look at what was happening in the industry. Has there been a layoff here, a layoff there, whatever. And I felt this deep sort of anger, which I think a lot of my colleagues also felt, that we were not talking about. It felt hypocritical that we talked about everyone, politics, bureaucracy, sports people, protests. We questioned everyone, but somehow there was no space for us to talk about ourselves. And you were always told that that's not something that you do. And, the old-fashioned thing was also that if another paper broke a story, you'd say a week, a daily, a prominent economic daily reported, blah, blah, blah. You'd never say Economic Times did this or that. So there was just so much of, there was just such a lack of conversation around ourselves that kind of upset me. And these were recurring conversations that we would often have in the newsroom. There was this one very stark incident that I remember of an honor killing of one of our colleagues. Honor killing, quote unquote. She was a contemporary of mine. We were together in IMC, except I was in Dhenkalan and she was in New Delhi. But we came in the same batch. And she was in love with a man, a boy, I think again her classmate. And she went back and she was very close to, I was on the op-ed edit section, so I was on one part of the, newsroom, and she was on the news section. So she was very close to the people doing the news pages. And she went back and she didn't come. And then there was panic in the newsroom and stuff like that. her friends were trying to get in touch with her because I think they knew that she was going to go inform her parents about the fact that she's going to marry this person. And next they got to know that she's no more. And the parents, obviously, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I can check this for you. I think the initial thing was that she's killed herself. And then it turned out, slowly it came out. I think her boyfriend started speaking to the media. He said that, this is her parents. I think her mother had called her back. She had kind of told her that I'm really unwell or whatever. And it turned out that it was a case of her parents murdering her. And I don't know what happened to the case finally. I should check that. But, it was such a big story. And we were a business paper, so we just didn't have it. Now, for us, it was such a big story, right? Our colleague, I remember a mail from the editors also had come to us at that point saying that condolences to the family or whatever, we were with. And that was so jarring for us. And of course, it's naive. A business paper is not going to put a story on, honor killing on its front pages. That's just not how it works. And I get it now. I get where they were coming from. But at that point, as young journalists, this was just very upsetting to me and a lot of us. So finally, I think we placed an ad, a condolence memorial, kind of an ad in the paper, in remembrance kind of a thing for her. But all this really got to me. And I felt that you have to be talking about media and you have to be talking about journalists. And I think that really that gave me some sort of an indication of what I wanted to do in journalism. And of course, then I moved on from Business Standard to DNA. And that's another story altogether, and we can get to that. But I think in the early period of my career as a journalist, that shift from being this floozy character who thinks she's gonna, type a beautiful story and whatever, finding some sort of purpose in journalism, I think that is I think that period shaped me in that way that I immediately felt that it was important to talk about journalists. Having said that, I learned a lot in Business Standard. I think that I was terrible, and it was great to have bosses to tell me that I'm terrible. I learned everything about language, about writing, about brevity, about news, why just because you feel for a story doesn't make it a story. There are elements to a news story. There's a reason why you can't take your audience for granted. Simple things like why you need to, even in a news story, you need to tell them, you need to give context, you need to give background, but you can't labor a copy with all of that. So all that I learned, I had fabulous bosses, and I think it is still one of the very good places for anyone to learn. Traditional mainstream news organization where you can, you still have people that you can really learn from. And now when I think of young journalists joining like a Times Now or Republic, I feel like क्या सीखते होंगे? मतलब newsroom mentors का भी हाल is, I really think about it. And I feel really lucky that, okay, I had bosses who were really committed to the craft of bringing out a newspaper, which is really amazing. And it's a daily job. It's means, in our current scenario where a lot of journalists come into journalism and they're on digital, and you make a mistake and you can just, fix it within a minute, and you don't even need to write a correction. Most organizations don't even put a correction. With newspaper, you understood the importance of being accurate. You knew a mistake printed next day would be hugely embarrassing. You'd be called up into the office. You'd be asked, what the hell were you doing? Why did you get this wrong? You'd have to write a correction. So all that discipline, I think, is very important. I learned a lot of that in Business Standard.
In one of your pieces, you have this sentence quote, if you are a broadcast journalist, you are in the unenviable position to take inspiration from newsroom leaders such as Sudhir Chaudhary, Deepak Chaurasia, Rajat Sharma, Aparna Kashyap, Rogi Robina Likayat, you get the drift. And that's terrible. And, when I look back and I kind of was in and out of journalism for a while, though not in a mainstream kind of way. And my impression of it always was that it was essentially people were mediocre. That if you came across a good editor somewhere, you were really lucky, and there were excellent editors kind of randomly strewn across a place, but you were very lucky to come across them. But most were mediocre. You would not really get, most people would not get good mentorship. If you got it, you were lucky, you were in the right place at the right time, and so on and so forth. So, is that an impression you would broadly agree with? And B, I'd like you to speak about, both the editors and mentors you had in that phase of your career, and also what were the kind of things that you were sort of learning from them, both about the craft and what you call the purpose of journalism?
So I think in terms of mentors and editors, I would say, so starting with Business Standard, we had this, I was on the op-ed edit pages. For the first 3 years, I think that's all I did. And then I moved out. And we had this editor who'd been with, I think, Business Standard for about 20, 25 years now. She was a legend. She is a legend. And I think she was an institution within Business Standard, Kanika Datta. And she was a terror. Because she was a perfectionist, and she would demand that perfection out of you. And you really had to live up to, her standards of perfection. And she was so good at everything that she did that you couldn't even grudge it against her. A lot of times you have bosses who want that out of you, but they just can't do it themselves. And then you kind of say, yeah, theek hai, khud to aata nahi hai, kuch karna to, whatever. But that was not the case with her. She was just really, really excellent at her work. And she was a terror, sort of a terror in the newsroom, because she would really get angry if you messed up with grammar. And after a point, I could figure out, when she'd walk out of her cabin, I could tell from the tone of her heels. If it's tuck, 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 that means I fucked up. She's pacing down with the page to tell me, what the fuck have you done? Or if it was a leisurely tuck, 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 I was like, okay, aaj ka din theek hai, acha nikal gaya. So, and what I learned from her, I think just language, The first piece, in fact, I wrote was so terrible, and I remember her completely reworking it and making it sound so smooth and beautiful. A news piece cannot be laborious. I think I learned that from her quite a bit. You can't have the importance of an intro. What does the first line mean? Why should you be spending so much of your time figuring out your first 150 words? What should you be conveying through those beginning words? How do you conclude a story? Words, just the economy of words, because you can only fit in, you only have so many columns to fit in. So you don't have this luxury of just writing on and on, droning on and on. So I learned that a lot from her. Just little things that she'd do in terms of how she'd cut a copy, or, there's all these Indianisms that we've learned. What is that most... she used to have this one very concerned individual. We always write concerned authority or concerned. It's like, it is authority concerned, individual concerned. It is not concerned authority. Silly things like that. But how we write, we write in a way which is so laborious sometimes, and so bureaucratic, and what was a bunch of other things, like these little things I remember, these little phrases that I learned to fix. So I learned that from her. I think also just, she was also great in the sense that I was able to review books in my very second year. Now, Business Standard book review pages are very prestigious. Not everyone could just start reviewing books. But once she, kind of got confidence in what I could do, she would give me books off and on, because she also understood, because after a point, I would pester her and say, actually, I want to be a writer. I want to report. I don't want to edit. And she would actually tell me back then that, look, anyone can be a writer or reporter. It's very hard to edit. And you can get a lot of reporters out there. But editing is something you're not going to get. So you should learn this. And that's where the money is also, she told me. Being able to edit, because reporters come and go. A lot of people can write, but it's really the editors and the editing that makes a paper and a product. So I also realized the importance of because today I think a lot of young people come in and they want their names, they want their bylines, which is amazing to have your byline on a piece of story. But the real magic is the editors. Those are the guys who really make a story, can make a story come alive, or really give it a shape which makes it readable. That I think I kind of understood with her, thankfully. So, and also one important lesson I think also learned, that it's good to have a life. Because I remember she used to come like 10:30 and she would leave at 7. She would just finish her work and leave. And then she would take, once in 4 years, she would take a long vacation, I think a month or two off, for her because she was a big football fan.
Wow.
So she would take that whole month off to watch the game. And that was her thing. So, yeah, so that, and then I think, yeah, having the space to write is also great. And I think that is one of the important things that a boss must do, that you should, especially in journalism, give people a hard time if you're the boss, because that's just the nature of the job. If you want the job done, if you want it done well, you have to be hard. But you also have to not learn to not hold a grudge. So I could be shouted at one evening and I could be totally down in the dumps, said, shit, I did such a terrible job. It was so embarrassing, my mistakes. But the next day would be a new day, you know. So that's also something that I try and do now that I am a boss, that I don't kind of hold it against someone for messing up. DNA, I think by the end, because of the rigorous training I got there, I then moved on to DNA. That was mostly to do with the fact that I didn't really see myself growing in a business paper because I didn't have the interest to be in that space. I wanted to write again. That kida to write and report was there, and I wasn't getting to do that. I would be stuck making pages and editing. And DNA gave me the opportunity to become a reporter and a feature writer. So I moved there, and there we had, it was a crazy time again because DNA was perpetually launching in Delhi. Every 6 months there would be news कि Delhi में paper आ रहा है. So we came in with the expectation that we're going to be launching a paper. That never happened till I was there. But 2014 happened. I did a bit of election coverage for them, and by that time it was pretty clear where things are going in the newsroom. Do you want me to get to that, or do you want?
We'll come to that.
Okay.
We'll come to everything.
Okay. No, I think I'm moving quite fast with all the. Okay. So, yeah, DNA. I think 2014, 13, it was pretty clear where things are going to go with newsroom because the Modi phenomena had happened. Editors were excited about it. Owners were excited. This was Subhash Chandra, obviously. We were given clear instructions in the run-up to 2014 that we are... one editor in Bombay very casually called me up once and said, we are promo. I was like, promo? It's like, pro-Modi, right? We're promo. So I was like, okay. And reporters and editors found this innovative way in DNA, which was just hilarious, that they would write the copy as whatever they want to write. So even if it is something, a rally which hasn't been attended well, a BJP rally, they would give a very glossy headline, but they'd write the truth in the copy because the owners would, I guess, just look at the headline. So sometimes the headline would be just completely opposite to what the story said. And yeah, I think I knew that if I'm going to be around here, it's just going to be a lot of... And it was a really hilarious incident where we had started covering elections. And I had done a bit of covering in Uttarakhand. And I had stopped in Dehradun at that point. And I was talking to a lot of my relatives, a lot of older people there. And I realized that, at that point, we still saw Modi as this hardliner, masculine... RSS, macho, kind of his appeal among the Hindutva hardcore crowd. That was still what, the popular perception was. And at that time, I was talking to a lot of women, and a lot of women liked him, A lot of women loved the way he spoke. They loved what he represented. They loved the fact... And these are women, older generation that probably grew up reading Premchand, seeped in this socialist kind of Nehruvian idea. And their sudden attraction to Modi, I thought that was very interesting to do as a feature writer. So I went and I pitched the story in the newsroom. We were looking at features and I said, I think it's a very interesting thing. And I was looking at it as a sociological thing I'd do. Ki dekho Premchand se kaise ab hum Hindutva ki taraf, what could be the reason? And the editor just, I think, heard women, Modi and housewife. And he said, why don't we do this piece on why housewives find Modi attractive? So it turned into this completely fluff piece that I had to do. Then for your audience, I am the first journalist to break the story on Modi's sexiness. That story still exists on DNA and a lot of people followed it up. But the story basically, because they got very excited, we'll do a feature story pushing Modi as this, amazing whatever. And I was told very clearly that, look, it has to be positive. And the story is about why women love Modi. And I was like, who do I talk to for this? So I spoke to Kavita. I spoke to this Mrs. Priyanka Mrs. Priyanka Gandhi, I think she's called. She's on Twitter. She's a huge
Mrs. Gandhi.
Mrs. Gandhi.
Mrs. Gandhi.
Back then, I think her name is Priyanka.
I don't
I don't
think
know.
so. I mean,
No.
I don't know what Preeti Gandhi is.
Preeti.
Yeah.
Mrs. Gandhi, she's called. At that time, she was just an upcoming kind of an influencer, but very pro Modi. So, and not decidedly political at that time. So I thought, okay, I'll interview her. I'll speak to Kavita Krishnan to get like a counter view. And I said, who do I talk to about sexiness of Modi? I said, Shobha De ko phone karte hain. Who else? So I called up Shobha De. And she was like, oh, she was pretty like, what nonsense, I don't know of these women that you're talking about. And okay, let me see, I'll respond to you or whatever. And then before my story could come out, I saw she had done a column in Times of India on Modi's sexiness that, I got a call from someone who told me that Modi is, women fancy him, but I'm really surprised women fancy him or whatever. So I was like, bhai, why have you written a whole column? You're supposed to be responding to my... So that was my first brush with my deep, insightful story on Modi being stolen away for a column. But anyway, so that was happening. This was a time where we knew that everything was going to boil down to how Modi is great. And I kind of understood that and I wanted to get out of that very quickly. So... And I did, right before the election results. I then joined News Laundry. That Kida of this, everything. Now the conversation has shifted from layoffs, job insecurity, what the industry was going through. Those were the conversations journalists were having in Business Standard, to DNA, where we were talking about the space to do journalism. How can we do stories that can get published while not sucking up to Modi or the BJP, or while being earnest in what we saw, or while not being propagandists. So those conversations were happening. And I think that stayed with me, the need to tell our stories. And News Laundry came as this, breath of fresh air. By then they were doing Clothesline. It was a fabulous show that Madhu used to host, used to just rip everyone, all the anchors and all the media personalities. They were writing about media in a very cheeky way, which I loved. They were being irreverent. They weren't taking journalists so seriously. And they told journalists to not take themselves so seriously. So that really attracted me and I applied and I got through. And then I have been with them since 2014 now. So yeah.
Amazing. So lots to double click on.
Yeah.
First, sort of a question on craft. You spoke about, the dichotomy or the false dichotomy between editing and writing. And it strikes me that if you learn how to edit, you are automatically learning how to write much better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about how that experience kind of shaped you and just generally over the years how you've grown as a writer, because I would imagine that there is that, like everybody, if they go into J school, they're young, they're like caught up in the exuberance of their own writing, as it were. Then you begin to work in a newsroom. As you said, you were lucky enough to have people who would push you and correct you and kind of teach you to edit. The process of learning to edit must have helped you as a writer. And later, I'm guessing later on down the line, when you yourself become an editor and become a mentor to others, just teaching them also would help you become much better at your own craft of writing. So just for a moment to focus on that craft itself, writing and reporting together, just take me a little bit through your journey of growth.
I think you're absolutely right. You just become a much better writer if you learn to edit, because you've gone through fixing so many bad copies and you know what's making them bad. I think what happens with a lot of reporters, if you jump into this profession as a reporter, if you're very sharp, then you can learn from the edits that are being made. And again, like you said, a good mentor. But often you don't realize what's wrong with your copy. I think reporters file, they send it, and that's it. And then, of course, there's that pure joy of breaking a story where it doesn't matter what you write, what you did, it's just the scoop that you've gotten. I think that is also a huge part of what makes reporting so important. But yeah, for me, one, I'm a little, for the last 3-4 years, I've written very little. And I really feel bad about that because with the work in News Laundry and with the show, it takes up so much of my time. So a lot of my writing has now become for the visual medium, which again I had to unlearn a lot of things that I learned as someone that wrote for a paper or just text. Because so many things visually, you don't need to write it. You can just communicate it through visual. So it's a complete different kind of writing. So unfortunately, I don't think and I would like to do that. I think I feel a little underconfident now I think I'd be a little daunted if I was to just do a text piece now, because I'm so used to video. I can just do a video, but now, which is very hilarious because I spend most of my time as a print journalist. But now I'd feel like if, and that again comes from the fact that I have, my first work as a journalist was an editor, so I'm very conscious of a bad sentence. The moment I write a bad sentence, I know it's shit, and I know it's so clunky, or that it's so, I'm so critical that I won't get beyond that first 150 words. Often this has happened, and this is happening to me a lot off late, that I can't get past beyond my own bad writing because the editor in me is like, what have you written? It's such a clunky sentence. It's so bad. Do you even need to write this? I don't think anyone benefits from it. So I think with editing, broadly, you learn, of course, language. Why it's important to be brief, why it's important to respect your audience's time. They're not going to listen to you or read you. Every sentence has to lead to another sentence which is worth their time, I think. And that you learn in journalism a lot, because it is about time. There's plenty of things happening in a day. You've chosen to speak about this one thing, and you need to capture your audience attention with that one thing. You better make it impactful, because that's how they will listen to you or they'll read you. So that first important thing you learn as an editor, and you learn it because you're cutting sentences, you're shortening them, you're putting the correct punctuation, you're using one word instead of 5 words, but you're essentially doing it because you respect your audience's time. You want to get them to read the news and get them to understand the impact of what you're trying to say. And you want to make sure that they don't just leave your story halfway. So you learn that. And I think that's a very valuable thing as a reporter, because when you're on the field, and that's how I've worked as a reporter also, strangely. Sometimes I'm editing on the field. Back when I used to do a lot of reporting, I don't do much now. But I would just know instantly that's a quote that's going in, that's not going in. So you learn all this a lot when you're editing. Okay, this can go, this has to be in the beginning. What can I say that'll grab the attention right at the beginning? So brevity, importance of the economy of words. And of course, if you're a news professional, why are you saying the story? What can you write in your story that can make your audience understand why you're writing this, or why we've chosen to focus on this particular piece of news when there are 1,000 other things that are happening around the world or around the city or country or whatever. So those things I learned very well for 3 years. And I think that really helped me so it helped me in the way that my copies, I would be able to tell a good story, but I think it also worked against me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I haven't written enough, is because I get very critical of my own writing. And that's because of your training as an editor. You can spot a bad sentence, even if it's coming from you. I think reporters fall in love with what they write, for them. And they argue with you, that the standard desk versus reporter fight on this sentence is important, put it back in. And you have to convince the editor, or sometimes the editor gets convinced, sometimes the reporter needs to be convinced. But I think that's a fundamental difference between editing and reporting, and especially in journalism, that reporters just love everything they write. Every piece of detail is important. They can't have this slight distance from the story that can make them, that can make the story better. And I think editors have that. They realize why a certain thing needs to go, because there's a bit of distance. And good editors, actually, they're gods, I think, in journalism. The really good ones. When you don't get, and we don't have enough of that, the mentorship problem also, because I think somewhere down the line also, with everything that news had to do with constraints on resources, one journalist doing 5 beats, an editor having to make a page, 5-6 pages for 10-15 editions. Where's the time? So it's not even their fault sometimes, and when they're unable to mentor and unable to excel in their own kind of departments.
And I also want to ask about that because, this is, of course, from an editor's point of view, you're so busy, you're doing so much. It's also true from a reporter's point of view that on the one hand, because of shrinking resources, journalists have been forced to become more and more generalists.
Yeah.
That you're doing 3 stories a day, and one day you're on this beat, the other day you're on that beat, the beat reporter has vanished. And more than that, there are already the imperatives that different forms force upon you. Like earlier, you said when you were writing for a newspaper, you had to be super careful because this thing is coming on print. You can't hit
Yeah.
backspace after
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
So you are spending the time doing that story and doing the due diligence. If you're an online site only, then it maybe that same imperative doesn't really matter. You can put a correction out there.
Clarification.
Your analytics guys will tell you that volume matters, so you have to keep putting stories out. There is greater pressure on journalists to do more and more work. I was chatting a couple of days back with Seema Goswami. That episode will probably release after this, but she, spoke about her time in Sunday, which was, of course, a weekly magazine back in the day, and how much more time they had to do stories, and all the imperatives and incentives are therefore different. If you're doing a 3,000 word story for a magazine, or you're doing an 800 word report for a newspaper, or you're filing 100 words for something that is online, or you're tweeting something, the form kind of keeps changing. So, how much do you think, that has kind of impacted the way journalism is done today? Because what has also happened is that even old school forms like newspapers seem to increasingly take their cues more and more from what is trending online. So the Twitter hashtag suddenly becomes something that editors are looking at and saying, this is in the news, let's do a story on this. And that can lead to this self-defeating vicious circle where you just spiral all the way to the bottom.
It's happening a lot of news channels, though I think newspapers are still a little careful about that. And there's the web department that will take care of the trending story, the most read story. I think the front page is still a little insulated from that. Often, like, for example, now Seema Heather is all over the news cycle.
And you have a great video on her.
But we haven't seen it on the front pages, thankfully. On the city page, yeah, a little bit, just in the beginning, because it was a curious story. But I think newspapers are largely insulated from it, but not the websites. Also, I just made me think that, when I became a journalist, web was we were given a choice of desk, page making, or go to the web section. And it was like punishment, like, where this obsolete. It was really considered as the worst of the worst probably worked there, or the most inconsequential. And it's completely changed. I mean, the change has been radical on the importance of the web desk. Not even a web desk now. You have, all papers have a different .com entity. So no, where were we on? I think so. One thing for especially journalists who begin with digital, the deadline thing. That's a huge thing. I have constantly, constantly have conversations on the importance of deadline in the newsroom, because with digital, a deadline is just no longer a deadline. Like the way we had to, it could not be 6:36. 6:30 the page had to go, otherwise you're losing ads, or you're setting off the whole cycle of printing back by 1 minute, which was losing money. And that was drilled into you. There was just no way that you could do it, no matter what happened. That urgency has gone, I think, with digital. So that rigor, that importance of a deadline, which I think is very important for journalists. That is one change I see with the advent of digital journalism. And yeah, it is not, I don't hold it against an organization that now you have the luxury, or a journalist, that you have the luxury to now update a piece or correct it. It's fine. We're in times of digital, and it's fine. If you get new information, it's great to update it. It's great to issue corrections as fast as you can. But what's happening, what really gets me, is that there's a lack of accountability, because it's not, with the newspaper, it's printed. People have a copy. People can say, listen, you published this. Now you better put a correction in the same place. With digital, there's no footprint, so to speak. There's no sort of physical proof of how you screwed up. So organizations can have this easy way of just pulling a story down and pretend like it never happened, or just not issue a correction. Something we are very militant about in News Laundry. Like, you have to write in your update that was changed at this because we made this mistake, and it was updated to this. Because it should also, the reporter should also feel that under their byline there's a correction, which can sometimes be embarrassing. So it's good for you to be embarrassed by it because you made it in the first place. But also honesty with your audience, that we got this wrong. What happens in a lot of organizations, and not digital organizations, I'm talking about mainstream organizations also, stories vanish. There's no accountability. Details are changed. There's no accountability. Facts, you've got something completely wrong, then someone reaches out to you and says this was highly responsible, you just conveniently change that like that never happened and don't issue a correction. So that I think is a very dangerous thing, because it deteriorates your trust with the audience and the audience's trust in journalism as a as a rigorous exercise. This whole thing of journalists can write anything they want to and get away with, it's been cemented because we've also been very reckless with how we've treated stories, often. So to me, that is a huge change. The convenience of not having to be very accountable to your audience.
I want to also ask you about the why of journalism. Like earlier, you spoke about purpose, and we, of course, spoke about why an individual may get into journalism, and the different reasons for that. But I'm thinking about the larger why of journalism. Like, how does one look at journalism or define its purpose? Because at one level, as an economic activity, the point is, people want to be informed, they want news, they want narratives, you're fulfilling that. Your duties to your shareholders, you do whatever people want to read, you serve that. So that is one kind of rationale. And another rationale talks of like a higher purpose, that you have fidelity to the truth, you are the all the cliches, the first draft of history, speaking truth to power, blah blah blah, all of those come into play. And I wonder, how is your thinking of what that why should be formed for you, because then that would then dictate a downstream why, which is, what do you choose to do a story on? I mean, ultimately, even in the online world, what any publication or any editor decides to do is, you can do 800 things. You're choosing 10 things and saying, this is what is important to us, this is what we are going to do, and every choice of a story is in a sense a story in itself, with its deep, like earlier you said that if you're doing a news report, you need to find a way to communicate why you're doing that news report to the reader. Why is it important to you? So how do you think about that? Because especially in these times, it seems that it's really easy to take the first rationale, the economic rationale, which is respectable enough, supply and demand and all of that, and use that as a whale to do whatever you do. And on the other hand, you can say, no, I'm driven by this higher set of values. And also what seems to happen, to take it to the other extreme, is that good rigorous journalism has become so difficult these days that anyone who's doing it seems almost like an activist fighting the tide. And you should not have to be an activist fighting the tide if you're doing journalism, right? So what are sort of your thoughts on all this?
I've been really thinking about this purpose of journalism last 2 years, because we've started this election show where we hit the ground and we're on the road for about 15 days or so. And we've been to Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Shimla, Himachal Pradesh, Goa. So we did the whole 2022 cycle basically. And often on the road last 2 years, I've really been like, why do journalists do what they do? And I've had a lot of sort of self-doubt also on, am I meaningful to people? Because when I talk to people, their realities, and maybe it seems so because when I'm doing pure news, it's so hyperpolarized all the time that I can't really, it's always extremes. You're battling between extremes, and especially the nature of nuisance where we're fighting one extremity after the other and you're just trying to get everything to the center. But yeah, when you talk to people on the road, when you go to villages, when you go to, when you're just in the middle of democracy as it unfolds, and because journalism and democracy, I think they're very entwined. When you think about journalism, you think about being in a democratic setup, and what better way than elections to sort of go and figure out. And people's lives, everything that's happening and the conversations that people want to have, they're so far removed from what journalists think their aim is often. I don't know if I'm sounding too vague about it, but I have been thinking that, when I, go to a place and we're talking about right after COVID, Uttar Pradesh, we're talking to people about what it was like for them during COVID. And people come and, we heard like in one village, after everything that we'd seen, lack of oxygen, people lining up, deaths, those horrible images of bodies along the Ganga. And we go to this one village of, where people basically tell us how thankful they are to the government they didn't starve during COVID. And there's this deep, abiding, what do you say, gratitude towards the Modi government specifically. That, one guy very funnily said कि आपको दाल दिया, आटा दिया, नमक दिया, तेल दिया, और क्या घर पे आके खाना बनाया तुम्हारे लिए. So he's done so much for us. And and then when you have conversations about this, the whole thing around it is so polarized in the sense that you don't want to understand where that person is really coming from. How much of journalistic writing really looks at this sense of gratitude, where it's coming from, what really worked? Because the conversations around Uttar Pradesh elections were so much about the viciousness of, Hindutva, which is true. Parts of places, it was purely people telling us that we are happy that, Muslims have been put in their place. But there was also this other side to it. And the more and more I consume news, and for me, maybe also because I consume a lot of mainstream television news, it is just so polarized that we are unable to really look at, the real nuances of what a person does when they make their electoral choice. Or, for example, when we were in Punjab and we met these super smart, intelligent students. We were going from one university to the other. Gorakhpur University also we went. Just really bright young people. And I felt really depressed after meeting them, because these are people, they are just, they know everything about their booth, to their ward, to the impact that their Vidhayak has on the choices that are available to them, to policy. And there's just an uncertain future facing them, in terms of jobs. You have PhD students who are saying that, what do we do? Like, there's no other option for us but to go to Canada. क्या करें हम 8,000 की नौकरी में रहें? Or you have, in Gorakhpur University, who said कि नौकरी में self respect होना चाहिए. Delivery boy बन के हम नहीं घूमे. And so you're hearing these conversations, and when you look back at what news is doing, I feel like we're failing so badly in bringing out conversations that really matter. But yeah, the purpose of journalism, coming back to what we were talking about. Look, so I have great friends who are in newspaper, who are, very good at what they do and still doing amazing journalism. And I think for them, there is that one stream which is basically at its very pure form, it's information gathering. It's to give you information about something that you didn't already know about, whether it's in your city, whether it's in your, locality, your state, or your country. And, that's how it goes from bottom to top. To me, though, I think journalism's essential purpose should be to make something clearer. As simple. I mean, truth to power, I think sometimes is too lofty to say. I think just to be able to present clarity around what's happening around us. If people have voted for Yogi in the way they did, can I give my audience a clearer picture of what's happening here? If there is despondency among the youth in higher university with jobs, and the only hope they see for themselves is landing a government job, what's happening there? So I think those stories really excite me. How can we make the world around ourselves more clear? I think that, to me, is the highest purpose of journalism.
In other professions, you get less emotionally involved. Like, if I'm a banker, I got a job, there's an ambit, I do what I have to do, and that's it. If I'm an engineer, I got to build whatever machines I have to build, and I know I'm simplifying. But, I do what I have to do. Sometimes I go wrong, sometimes I go right. It's never personal. It never leads to an existential dilemma, ki, like, why the fuck am I doing this, it can in other ways. But I think the problem with journalism, especially in these fraught times, is that you might say that, okay, my job is to seek the truth, whatever it is to, bring clarity to everything that I write about and all of that. But when, we live in the kind of age where we are, where, politics plays such a huge part, where there are so few journalists actually doing journalism, I would imagine that then at a personal level, it gets really hard, that if you want to swim against that tide and do what you feel is journalism, you are almost by default carrying out an act of rebellion, almost like an activist. It is kind of political. And obviously, when you're a journalist and you're writing about the real world, if you're human, it's going to take an emotional toll. especially when you're covering, whatever you guys did during COVID or whatever. There is sort of so much to be frustrated about in this country. Like all these young people you mentioned, who, they're brilliant, they're bright, they're hungry, they're driven, they're passionate, and
They can really they can tell you about politics. Honestly, like
Exactly.
I feel like I really know nothing when I was listening to them because they just came from this real space and really knew what politics meant in a real world, in a real term.
Does it dishearten you? Because I keep going back now to that quote from Kashika C, and a family friendly version of that is Bhar mein jaye duniya, hum bajaye harmonia, right? Where you want to just, like, to hell with the world, you just want to do your thing. And I do feel like that a lot of the time because everything's going to hell anyway, you're not going to make a difference. Do you feel like that sometimes? I mean, how how hard is it to just kind of keep going? And there must be times where you turn cynical about yourself, that what is this higher purpose, kya ho raha hai?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not cynical. I mean, I question a lot about what are we doing, how much of an impact is it making. But I also feel that beyond the point, you can't keep thinking about impact. It's just, you won't be able to do anything if you keep thinking about that. I look. I think the big shift also that has happened with the nature of consuming news, especially because there's so much of information available. Like, for example, I think a lot of young people just actually listen to influencers when they want to make up their mind on a Kerala story or on Manipur. They will go to their favorite influencer and they'll get a wrap of, what's happening. And I think the one important thing is that we at one point were at this position where we were telling the world how to think or shaping it, or we had this thing of, I think that has changed a lot. I think most people are no longer looking up to journalists to tell them how to think about something or think about a story or even be shaped by the news that they consume. They because of the sheer amount of stuff that's available on internet, you can really move from one thing to the other. But no, so I'm not cynical. I don't get disheartened very easily because I think for me now the big thing that I really think about is that same impulse, right? In the beginning, like, why am I telling the story? How can I connect with my audience? I still have that driving me, and I feel video has given me a great opportunity to be able to do that, to really reach out to a large number of people who would otherwise never come to News Laundry or read a piece written by me. So experimenting with video, talking to your audiences, figuring out how can we connect with our audience without talking down at them, that kind of excites me. Ultimately, even with, like, say, a product like a TV nuisance, which is a critique of television news, I know that we are small when you look at the sheer volume of television news propaganda that's out there. No matter what we say about Sushant Singh Rajput, no matter what we say about Riya Chakravarti, we've drone on and on and on about that. I know a huge part of India believes that there was some mystery to that tragic death and the girlfriend had something to do with it. And if I start thinking about was I able to really fight it, I would just stop doing it because no. But I don't focus too much on that aspect of it. I just focus on what I can do in my capacity and how many people can I reach and how relevant can I be to that set of audience and how much can I grow doing that. So that keeps me going. So I'm not very terribly cynical about sab bhar mein ja raha hai to main kyun kar rahi hu. But my thoughts on, while traveling, thinking about journalism, I think because it gives me a little break from the newsroom. So I do think about what are we, what stories are we telling? Are we connecting with people? How relevant are we to them? What is also the purpose of journalism in that you were saying that is it also just information? Or is it sometimes just also just giving them a clearer picture on something or just making them think sometimes, leaving them with a question? So those kind of things I think of, and that makes me push towards think of formats that could be interesting and engaging, podcast being one of them. What you do, for example, with your podcast is not journalism. I don't know if you would define it that way, but for many people, it would be more important than the newspaper of the day, in terms of what it adds value. So I think you have to start thinking about journalism also like that. What can it be beyond what it is just supposed to be?
One of my learnings while doing the podcast is that we don't think often enough about how audiences engage with content, and we just look at the number of people. Like I often say that I'd rather have like 100,000 listeners of an episode than 10 million people watching a YouTube video, because the drop off rate there is incredibly high. And here I'll have an average session time of 40 minutes or whatever it is. Like you said, podcast engagement rates are high, and also that therefore I might in absolute terms have a much smaller number of people that I'm reaching out to, but the
Really impacting.
but it's really impacting them. They are engaged. It's a self-selected group. Obviously, a lot of my guests will often comment that, hey, your listeners are so different from everyone else, because they're not engaged in the narrative battles, and they're not looking at simplistic binaries, but they really want to know, and they're perfectly happy if you don't give answers and you give questions. And I'm wondering, and I'm thinking that to a large extent that must also be true of News Laundry,
A
especially.
lot, yeah. And especially with our subscribers, I think they're a wonderful bunch of discerning news consumers. And again, like we don't need, exactly with my show, I never think of it's great to be watched by a lot of people. And it's great when meet people and say, oh, we saw you. And nowadays, people don't even watch the video. They say, I'm going, aapka reel dekha. So for a lot of people now, it's not even a YouTube video. It's aap reel karti hain. Because my friends would joke and say, you're no longer a journalist, you're a YouTuber.
5 years later, you'll be TikTok superstar
Yeah,
Manisha
so
Pande.
so now I'm a reel wali. So no, but lot of for us, it's always how many people would find value in us to pay for what we're doing. Pay to do the sort of news that we want to do. And it's amazing. Over the past year, this year, we've been being the organization that we are. We have like 7 reporters, 10 reporters, not really huge. We've been able to cover Manipur. We've been able to cover Odisha. We're going to be covering Himachal. And that's only because we have a bunch of subscribers who really believe in it, believe in what we're doing, and pay for it, which is just audacious, I think, for us to have survived so long without any advertisements, even to the extent that we don't even take ads on our YouTube. To have this audience that really sticks with you, that makes you think, and an audience that is not always what I love about the News Laundry audience is they often write back to us telling us that, listen, you were really stupid when you said that after a podcast, or we don't agree with you at all, and you really need to read up a little bit on that, or you really need to, change your views on this. So it's an amazing bunch of people who are really engaged with what you're saying, and that's deeply rewarding for News Laundry. And I think just purely that we've been able to even do stories like, breaking the Hathras story, being able to cover COVID as extensively as we could, looking at the whole Ayodhya land deals, just because we have people who believe in us, we're able to send reporters, and we're able to send reporters without ever giving them a line, which sometimes I really want to sit with our reporters and tell them that, how amazing it is that you guys get to report and we never kind of, apart from, be useful, tell good stories, get your facts right. There is never a get this story back for me. A lot of television journalists you talk to, and that's where the dissatisfaction comes from. They're like, we are basically bite collectors for the primetime show. So we have to get a bite that fits what's already been decided. And that's so disheartening. That's the best way to kill everything that journalism stands for, which is first curiosity, Entering a story without knowing where it'll lead you doesn't mean you go unprepared or you just bumble your way around it. But just being able to get a story back and explore it and be honest to what you find on the ground. And we've been able to do that purely because we've had this amazing bunch of people who believe us, support us, and say, yeah, go cover Himachal, cover Manipur. We want to hear from your reporters. We want to see what kind of stuff you get for us and pay for it, which is just amazing.
It's a miracle. It's priceless. A deep admiration. And the TV news channels today are more like TV production than journalism, in a sense. I want to, before we go in for a break, I want to ask a question about, when we were talking earlier about craft and you mentioned how it's different from video. And it struck me that it is different for video in another critical way. That when we are doing traditional journalism, reporting on stories and reports and all of that, to a large extent, the reporter herself is absent, right? It is a story that is telling itself and you want to, make that speak for itself. But when you do the kind of work that you do on video, it is actually critical and it is a feature and not a bug if you are present in that. If a sentence is, say, not as crisp as it would otherwise be, but it has your personality in it, because I find that what a lot of people relate to in modern creators, whether they are podcasters or YouTubers or whatever, is a personal. There is an intimacy. You feel like you know this person. Like I was telling you before we started, when my favorite compliment is when I did my show with Abhinandan, and someone said I felt like I was sitting in a living room chatting with you guys, and at one point I interrupted till I realized it's a podcast. And I feel exactly the same way when I see your show, and that's a sign of, I think, all good creators, and that's completely different from journalism, because now what becomes important is that you, the person, have established that relationship of trust with your viewers, your readers, your listeners, and that becomes part of the game. Is this something you've thought about?
So, you know what, with influencers or content creators or the kind of people that you're talking about, in fact, my team often tells me this is a phenomenon that's happened post COVID. The videos that tend to do well are videos that aren't sleekly edited, they aren't very well produced. That's just one person talking to you. I think maybe because during COVID, we were going through this feeling of being alone. We wanted to connect to people. So we really connected with creators that were just talking to us, with very minimal intervention in terms of an edit or a clip. And those guys were really viraling at that point. And I still know of a bunch of, some of them are just terrible. It's very sad that they have a viewership. But, like a guy just sitting in his office and just talking to you. And those guys are getting crazy hits. And that's purely because he's just talking to you like you're having a drawing room conversation with them. They're like your uncle talking to you about why Ram Mandir should be there. That kind of a thing. So yeah, that is a feature of how you click with your audience in the influencer, YouTuber kind of a space. However, I have been very conscious. I've been doing nuisance for about 5 years. Only over the last 1 year have I kind of done something because it's in me to do it. Like be flippant with the line or just use a word that I would use just because it's Manisha talking. I have been very conscious about, even though it's a lot of fun, the show, it's supposed to be satire, humor, and we do a lot of things. I have, from the beginning of it, I've approached it as a journalist in the sense that everything I have to, while even making fun, it has to be accurate. I have to be saying, describing a thing exactly as it should be. And I have spent a lot of, at least when it comes to script writing, initially the jokes and all, I would sit a lot with Abhinandan and he would kind of, give me a joke here, a joke there. And I kind of, because humor is not something that came to me very naturally in the beginning. So he would help with that quite a bit. And then eventually when I kind of, was writing on my own, I rarely ever did anything because it's Manisha would say it or that. I would really evaluate what I'm saying about. For example, if I am talking about Manipur, and that very disturbing video that came out, the first instinct of mine when I watched it was just disgust. You wanted to just abuse and then you just wanted to cry that something like this had happened. But an influencer maybe who's gotten their audience's attention, just that breaking down. And I know that one of the anchors in Article 19, it's a Hindi YouTube show, he had this really angry kind of a reaction to it. And it did really well, that video, because he was just screaming at the screen. Even though I felt that way, I wouldn't do it. So that thing that you're talking about is that, do I do things purely because now people want to see what Manisha wants to say about a certain thing or how she would react to a certain thing? I don't really go by that. I still, maybe because it's my journalistic training also, there's a little bit of distance, even as a host, in what I feel and what finally goes in. And it's really hard sometimes because we watch a lot of crap and we watch a lot of toxic stuff. Sometimes we just want to abuse people. For the longest time, I had this rule of not using the word Godi media, which I've now recently given up on. And my team would often use it, put it in a thumbnail or... And
the
I would
Godi
just
card. I saw the Godi card in one of your videos.
Yeah. Eventually, last 1 year, we've started doing it. It was the longest time I didn't want to do it, even if I felt that way, because I felt that really polarized an audience. And I didn't want to, even while critiquing the anchors that I did, I didn't want to call them Godi or give them names. I wanted to be more about what they're doing wrong, what they could have done right, why this particular news based on complete, crap from WhatsApp is wrong. And I felt just labeling someone Godi media was an easy way out. It meant less work on the critique that I put in. And it's just easy to call someone Godi media and get out of it and make fun. So I didn't have that. I changed that over the last 1 year because of the sheer stuff that we've been watching. I'm like, okay, now there's just no other way to describe this but this term that Ravish has coined, Godi media. So I still do it, but I do it sparingly. But yeah, so what I'm saying, I guess, is that there's still, because of my journalistic training, I don't let loose in that way. I think Abhinandan, in that sense, if you've seen some of his nuisances, he's way more free. He'd say, because he doesn't have that burden of being a journalist, he's a media professional, he's a CEO, but, he doesn't have that. So I'm still very cautious about what I'm putting out there, and I don't typically behave like an influencer in the sense I'm not that free with how I'd say something or do something.
So I really geek out on cycling for some reason, though I don't cycle myself. And one of my favorite video podcasts is this video podcast called the Lantern Rouge Cycling Podcast, hosted by two guys called Patrick and Benji, and they're really good. And a couple of months ago, a cyclist died tragically during the Tour de Suisse, Gino Mader. And the episode where they discussed it, Patrick just started crying inconsolably. And it was beautiful. And I think everyone who watched it, including me, of course, cried with him. And you really, in that moment, you kind of felt it. And I understand that that's not what you do. That kind of authenticity is more for creators. I won't use the term influencers. Largely influencers have just got this negative connotation for me. But a lot, I think all the good creators I enjoy watching, it's really personal. They're kind of bearing themselves, and that authenticity is there. And with you, you're not inauthentic, but it's very interesting how you've crafted what seems to me from a distance, and you can clarify your thinking on this and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that you've crafted this really funny, sharp persona, which is very much you, and it's a part of you, and it's what you genuinely feel. But it is a persona, and therefore it can, it is, to some extent, it's a production. And I can understand, when you say that you don't want to go to the level where you just show your anger, where you're really pissed off and you show it. Though I would love to see that, but that's my kind of bias, that I like to see that emotion, because then you relate as a viewer, you relate at just a completely different level. But it's just then
That's the next frontier for me.
that's the next frontier.
Really bear myself. But I've also, I guess, again, it's a journalistic thing, but I also find it a bit self-indulgent to just talk about how you feel. Like when this whole Manipur thing happened, just there's something horrific has happened to these women. And to then make it about my anger just feels a bit like I'm giving myself too much importance. Maybe that comes from that print newspaper traditional, even though, I've carved a very non-traditional role for myself as a journalist. But I still feel like when there's so much happening, do I want to make the centerpiece about how I react to it? Though I get your point, like why you're essentially giving people an outlet for their own catharsis on a certain event, because you feel through that, creator.
And it kind of stands out in the sense that,
Yeah.
like, I'm watching something, it's a production. I go to another video, it's a production. Then I watch something happens. There's something
Yeah.
real there. I make that connection. And it doesn't mean that the person has made it about herself.
Yeah.
But she's connected,
She's
because
connected.
who can not feel angry when you see that video? Who can
Yeah.
not feel sad when you
Yeah.
talk about someone's premature death? So I think there is something to be said for, just being yourself sometimes. Only
I
in
know.
this context, only in this kind of work, and not necessarily. And
So yeah, I would sometimes do that. Like, for example, the Manipur thing, I did use I. Now I'm also very careful about not using I. For some reason, I find it again, I feel a little uncomfortable saying I felt this, I felt that while talking to the audience. But I did kind of make that conscious effort of saying that, listen, I usually do this, but this time I'm not going to do that. So that was my little way of being authentic, because I used I. But no, I completely get your point. And I just have a question though. Like, do you think when the creators that you watch, when they bear themselves, like you said, like you cried, or sometimes you want to see them angry, is that, do they know that it's going to click and they do it, or because it's just how it is?
no,
That's how they feel.
if it's fake,
you
If
can
it's
tell.
fake, you always know. I think what often happens is that with creators, you get into a groove of being yourself. So, for example, I have no idea what even works with my listeners, except the overall approach seems to work. But I kind of bear myself. I mean, I am who I am. People have cried on my show. I've cried on my show. We've laughed on my show. We've had fun. I think listeners know that, okay, this is authentic. These are who the people they are. Now, obviously, you can't do journalism like that. When you talk of newspaper journalism, you're reporting stuff. But somewhere, I think you're not in a purely journalistic world either when you're doing a show. Like, I watch Nuisance because it's you. You've got your own style, your own humor, your own way of reacting to things. And everybody who watches anything watches it because of the person. So the personal then becomes important. These are not like disembodied words.
In that sense, I think what I'm driven by really, and maybe that part of my persona shows. um I think the best way to make something toxic, hateful, sinister, powerless is if you can just poke fun at them and you bring it down a little. You prick that bubble of uh, the self-important anchor who's speaking for the nation, or this self-righteous anchor who's going to be talking about how a girlfriend ruined a boyfriend's life and he was driven to kill himself because of her. And I think the best way to do that is that you just make fun of them. Sometimes it's very effective. So I think I've always kind of believed that you just you can bring something sinister, hateful down by just you know making fun of it in a way that exposes it. With the kind of news, for example, now if you're a Muslim today and you're watching television news, I just wonder, I mean, I really don't know what they go through, because channel after channel after channel, the news is how what you're eating is wrong, what you're wearing is wrong, who you may fall in love with is wrong. Your only job is, jihad, your only job is conversion. And I love this little comment under one of the videos that I had done, कि यहाँ हमसे 5 वक्त नमाज नहीं होती टाइम पे, इनको लगता है हम कन्वर्जन का टाइम. So he's like, भैया 5 वक्त नमाज कर लें, वो ही काफ़ी है. And I thought that was just, and as a Muslim guy, obviously, so that was such a funny way to just burst this whole jihad sinister conspiracy, which can otherwise be so toxic and poisonous. And it has real world impact in the hate that we see in society, divisions, or just sometimes even in hate crimes, or what young children, the kind of conversations you're having in school now. So I've believed that, and I think that I definitely make a conscious effort to kind of inject in the show that we're going to bring these people down by making fun of them, or we're going to expose them for who they are by just cracking a joke on what they're doing, whether it's their style, whether it's a substance, or what they're saying. And that, I think, is the bigger technique than maybe bearing myself out or speaking about how I feel about a particular news show.
And satire is obviously brilliant at sort of just exposing the ridiculousness of something in such a way that you can't help but laugh. And you do that so incredibly
we don't
well.
even have to do much, we just have to pick a clip. I mean, our job is super easy. And satire is, I think, huge. Like, it requires a lot of talent to do that. But here, we're just showing people what's happening, and, it's satire in itself.
No, I would give you much more credit than that. You guys are really good. And you also avoid a bunch of traps. And I want to ask you about what you think about them. And one of them is that, especially if you're watching what you do, and I don't know how you watch so much news television, there is so much low-hanging fruit out there. Like, things are just so incredibly ridiculous by themselves that I don't think you would have ever had trouble ki aaj content kya kare, kahan se dhoonde. It's all there. And the other danger also is that making fun of something, making fun of anything is ridiculously easy. Mockery is easy, snark is easy, and they are not satire, they are much lower forms. But my biggest complaint, for example, with social media is that it is full of snark and mockery and no engagement at all. And there are some things which are so out there that there is no option but to mock them, and they are satirical in and of themselves. But also, in that approach of treating everything with satire, one could say, and I've never seen you do this, but I think it's a danger with satire, therefore I'm sure you've thought about this and seen it happen elsewhere, that the danger then is that sometimes the engagement can seem too flippant, that sometimes a matter is nuanced and complex, and you could get asked that, hey, okay, fine, great satire, we laughed, aapne do teen joke mare, but this deserves more. Though frankly, I can't think of anything any of that being true for news television because it is just so out and out ridiculous today. But these are the inherent dangers of this craft. So what is the kind of thinking that then goes into it? Because it is not just about, you can do satire, but sometimes you can just go too far, and sometimes it is facile and it is easy. So how do you deal with those things?
So again, like, because we're doing this for News Laundry and we essentially see ourselves as journalists just experimenting with another form to connect with our audience, right? We want to communicate with them. We want to see what's clicking with them. And so we've chosen this format. The purpose very much still remains getting people to think about what's happening around them, telling them that, look, to me especially, this is very important, that with this show, I don't want to get into who you're voting for, what your preferences are. You like Modi, you don't like Modi. I just want you to have better expectations of your news. As a person, whoever you voted for, you need your news people to be talking about real issues that you're facing, whether it's bad urban planning in your city because of which your cars are drowning, or whether it's the tomato prices that are going up, or whether it's the prejudice that's being seeped into your head every day. And so we're really driven by that fact that everything that we do, we want people to expect better. And so we also have to do better. We can't just do a little, ha ha ha, isne ye bola, and make a reel and get hits and get away with it. We want to be able to communicate to people that this is what the story is. This is what you should be caring about today. Prime time was devoted to the Prime Minister inaugurating a convention center and saying, wow, what an amazing job. While Manipur has happened and he hasn't spoken about it in Parliament. A state divided completely along ethnic lines. I mean, when was the last time when you heard a news story where police is saying on record that we were unable to investigate this case because that's a cookie area and we are Meiteis and we can't go there? Or this complete division where the police is saying that, okay, we need the army to check because there's been a disappearance of these two teenagers. We don't know where they are. They're feared dead. They were probably murdered, but we can't go there and check. We need the army to check because that's a cookie area. We are Meiteis. Such a thing is happening in a state and you're saying, wow, a convention center has been inaugurated in Delhi, Pragati Maidan. So we mock the absurdity of it. And this, hilarious speech that I thought Piyush Goyal gave before the Prime Minister came on, saying that प्रधानमंत्री ने हमें शिल्पकार के तौर पे मदद करी, हमें आर्किटेक्चरल डायरेक्शन दिया, हमें बड़ी कड़ी नज़र उन्होंने रखी और हम what we said was basically PM है या PWD का कॉन्ट्रैक्टर है. Why is he telling you what to do with the convention center when there's so much else happening? और he's saying कि हमें इतनी कठिनाइयों से हम exhibitions होते थे यहाँ पे, किसी ने नहीं सोचा आधुनिक बनाने का. So we do all that. We do the mockery. We talk about how Arnab is saying, wow, amazing, I've just come back from the inauguration. But then we also want to draw your attention to what should have happened. So the core of it is, I think, maybe some form of news literacy, media literacy, where we want to tell people that, look, it's a polarized world. We have political choices. We're not getting into what choice is right, what choice is wrong. But media has a specific role in a democracy, which is to question people in power, not go after Rahul Gandhi night after night after night, because he's not in power. It is about being factual. It is not about talking about Mandir Masjid and what's happening in Gyanvapi when you have serious issues, plaguing the country, for example, malnutrition deaths. So we want to be able to do that. And I think that really drives we can never fall into that trap because we're very conscious about making people think about media, making them realize that they need to expect more from journalists. And so we also need to be delivering more than just, the laughs, basically.
And your video on the Piyush Goyal speech was hilarious. I was totally LOL while watching that. And the tragedy there is not that he gives a speech like that, but that every news channel that then shows it is basically doing a Piyush Goyal only, right? It's the same damn thing, and it is horrifying.
We wanted people to, it was so jarring for us to watch that in a week when it hadn't even been a week since that video had come out from Manipur. And then to talk about ek bhavya convention center bana diya. Matlab, that's again satire just writing itself. It could just be a movie, just complete absurdity. And we really wanted that to shine through. That you need people to think, is this important? Like, are we supposed to be now saying, wow, Modi ji, wow, because convention center mil gaya? Yeah. And my goal is always, I want to be able to reach out to people also who may not agree with me And the best way to do that for us in this show is not get into the politics of what you believe in, what you don't. Just expect better from your media. That's it. We just want you to, even if you love this government, you voted for it, there are certain parameters on the basis of which you should be judging it. Please know what those parameters are, And the role of journalists in enlightening you or informing you about what those parameters should be.
That's so beautifully put. And I must say, in defense of Mr. Goel, though, अच्छे दिन have come for convention centers. This is important. Don't underplay this. Some people like convention centers. I fully geek out on convention
मुश्किल
centers.
से एग्जीबिशन किया 50 सालों तक
चलो
वहाँ
break
पे।
लेते हैं. Let's discuss our favorite convention centers.
Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just the willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you.
Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Manisha Pande. Let's continue your sort of the arc in 2013, when you said that around 2013 you began to feel that the air is changing and things are changing fundamentally.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of ask you to elaborate on that, because in two ways, two broad ways that I can think of, things were pretty bad already, in the sense that journalists were always pliant. During the emergency, there is that comment by, I think, Advani about how journalists, when asked to bend, they chose to crawl. And journalism was always mediocre. It was always like in the 80s and 90s, I used to say that, the people who become journalists do so because they failed at everything else or kuch bacha nahi aa gaye. Obviously not true of present company, but...
well, like I said, since I didn't have the talent to be a writer, I decided...
oh God, I've put my foot in it.
or the
haven't I?
rigor of, or the hard work of being an actor.
Yeah. But you are right in that definitely in the last 8-9 years, it just feels like things have really moved and changed in really fundamental ways. And I want you to talk about this from a personal experiential point of view. Like, when did you begin to realize this was happening? What did you see? What happened?
So look, emergency and all was too far away for us. Even as journalism students, we read about it and whatever, but it was never something that we were deeply moved by or impacted by as people. I was born in 85, so, it's too far away.
This online site says 88.
Huh.
Yeah, there is. So I was obviously Googling your name, and there is some site which has some kind of profile which says Manisha Pande was born to high caste parents in 1988. And I was like, what a strange thing to write. Very weird.
Born to high caste, upper caste, so-called parents for sure, but 85 is my year of birth. So, no, so like I said, the problems that we were grappling with were, to my mind, the fact that increasingly there was no time to perfect yourself within the field if you wanted to. So if you wanted to be a beat reporter and you wanted to you chose environment as your area of interest, or you just were given that beat, you wouldn't have the time to excel in it. You would be given commerce with it, you would be given, covering industry with it. So journalists having to do 4 to 5 things together. Reporters, if I'm on the desk, then I would not, be given the time to maybe say rewrite a piece over a day and really understand what it takes to make a piece worth reading. I'd have to do, grammar check on 5-6 copies, put them on the page, make 5 other pages. So that was always an issue. And again, that's a problem of finance, constraints of resources, newsrooms shrunk. You just needed more people to do more things, which meant that you couldn't really excel in one particular thing. But I think 2013, like I said, that call from the editor in Bombay saying we're promo, that was surprising to me, because so there was always this problem with elitism. I remember very clearly that when the Anna moment was happening, and now when I look back, so I could never guess who my editors would have voted for or what was their ideological leaning. Maybe also because I was too junior, so I wasn't in on those conversations. I wouldn't know. But it wasn't something that I could. It wasn't a conversation in the newsroom. Are they congressy? Are they not congressy? But I remember clearly that there was a lot of disdain for the India Against Corruption movement. Now, you could disagree with that movement, and you could think that Anna was just, you know, a village bumpkin who flogged people because they drank, stuff like that. Could sense this disdain also, that these bunch of nobodies are challenging this elite kind of a coterie. And you could sense that some of that discomfort with IAC came also because it was a direct attack on Congress. So at that point, I couldn't put two into two or whatever. But now when I look back, I do think that, yeah, at that time you did have a lot of newspapers that editors, senior reporters who were very close to the system. And they didn't like that system being challenged, which was the UPA. We heard of stories of calls being made from, cabinet ministers to newspaper editors, sacking of journalists because somebody in the Congress was made to not look nice. Sonia Gandhi famously, for all the power that she held, didn't really ever, engage with the media in the way that we now want Modi to engage with. So all that was happening. But to me, as a young journalist, this was never an overbearing thing in the newsroom. I think that changed fundamentally in 2013, where, again, because, like I said, I was too young, so I wouldn't be in on what the editors, what they were thinking ideologically or who they leaned on politically. But I was still a very young staff writer, and I did get a very senior editor to tell me, look, we're promo. So that was a bit distinct to me, that it's not even through my boss, and it's not even in a, roundabout way. It's very directly to me that you cannot be writing this, and you make sure the story reads well. That was happening. And I think from there, we've come a long way. You have to read the recent CSDS report, which I was speaking about earlier, survey, which is the first of its kind survey that's been done among journalists. It includes a mix of Hindi, English language journalists, regional journalists. And they say that 80% of the journalists surveyed feel that their organization favors the BJP. Close to 70%, I think, are aware of people who have lost their jobs because of their political ideology.
Wow.
And a sizable percentage of journalists feel insecure today in newsrooms because they feel that they could lose their jobs because of their political ideology or what they may stand for. This was not the case in newsrooms. For journalists, even reporters to feel that way. Of course, there were pulls and pushes and everything. But I honestly didn't know which way my editors were leaning in terms of, of course, Sanjay Baru, he had been an editor and then he later on worked with the UPA, with Manmohan Singh. So that kind of closeness and network existed. But I think to be so blatant about where you stand and to be very clear about what kind of stories can go and cannot go. Editors at that point, even if they were meeting or were connected or were part of the same network, the standard jibe at NDTV, the NDTV, Lutyens Delhi kind of journalism where everyone's friends with everyone, everyone's meeting everyone in the end of the day and, sitting together and chilling with each other. But if you still had a story, you could go ahead with it. It wasn't so blatant that no story against the current government would run. And I think that has changed quite a bit today from then. For me, because I left so quickly, then I kind of saw where this was going, and I very quickly went on to News Laundry, which was just a remarkably different place. So I didn't really personally wasn't very, very impacted by that. Luckily, I moved at the right time. And a bunch of my friends at that time actually made Rohan, who moved he was with Mail Today, moved to Scroll. A couple of others, again, made that digital shift. So I think we got really lucky because right at the right time, we took the risk of moving away from mainstream and it worked out, touchwood, okay for us.
And you mentioned sort of cabinet ministers getting editors sacked, and that happened under both dispensations. First Chidambaram got rid of Raju Narisetti at Mint, and then Arun Jaitley allegedly did the same to Bobby Ghosh at HT. And the thing there is that, unfortunately, because of the way the industry is structured, all our big media houses also have interests in other areas.
Yeah.
So you might own a big newspaper, but you also own a chemical factory. Kal us pe raid ho gaya.
Or you have universities, you're in education.
Correct. So there is
yeah.
the way the imperatives are piled up is that you really don't want to mess with the ruling dispensation, especially this one, who are so vicious in unleashing multiple agencies after you. And therefore, it seems that the only place where good journalism is even possible will be from independent players like yourself, like Scroll, like Alt News, and so on and so forth. And that is fundamental, because when you would have gotten into journalism, you would have had a mental image of a particular landscape where there are broadsheet newspapers, there are tabloids, there are TV stations. Most of them are doing respectable work. It all seems great. And when I look at it myself, I just feel so incredibly disillusioned. It was a house of cards. Everything's kind of fallen apart. And I'm saying, okay, we are fortunate to have a bunch of good players. Ki theek hai, News Laundry hai, News Minute hai, Scroll hai, great. But even these guys are not exactly thriving. They are kind of fighting against the odds sometimes.
And also reach matters. Yeah, you need a mainstream media that does good journalism, because at the end of the day, those guys have the maximum reach. And again, like the ownership thing that you were talking about, I think for all the flack they get, Indian Express still does some amazing journalism. I think their front pages are worth reading. Hindu. And these two organizations don't have another interest. So Times will have education, universities, HT has, a bunch of other things. Express is expressly in the business of journalism, which is why I think they've been able to maintain quite a lot of credibility and do the kind of stuff that they do, which includes investigative journalism, which I think you do not find at all in any other paper now. So yeah, that is a huge aspect of where we are today, the conflicting business interests. But what was your question again? What
you feel about this evolving landscape. Like, does it kind of fill you with despair, as it sometimes does to me, because I don't see the incentives for the bigger players changing, and like you said, reach matters. And even for the smaller players, like, number one, just survival is hard, and number two, you could get into a trap, because if you're in that other ecosystem where you're expected to take a certain line, you could dogmatically take that line and again lose track of journalism.
So, of course, we're only talking about mainstream sort of Delhi-centric media when we're talking about this landscape, because we're talking about big papers, Hindi news channels, English news channels. And look, what I've been able to do with News Laundry since 2014 and what we've been able to do as an organization is amazing and very freeing. But if I just zoom out and look at journalism, and yeah, we're very, now we have an organization called DigiPub, which is a conglomerate of, where all digital organizations have gotten together. We recently did an election show where 5 of us got together: Caravan, Scroll, Wire, News Laundry, News Minute. And we decided that, we want to give a counter to television news. Election day results, got together, tried something new out. It had great results, and we want to do that ahead. So there's all of that happening. But if you look at the numbers, majority of the people in India do go to television news to consume their news. That is a fact. The power that a Sudhir Chaudhary or Anjana Om Kashyap has over her viewers, collectively also maybe, all of us together may not have in terms of the reach. So it does matter when she picks up price rise as an issue, because that's just going to resonate with a lot of people. And when an Hathras happened, even though News Laundry, we were the first to go out and really report in great detail as to what had happened, why the police hadn't woken up. But what really changed the story was when the India Today reporter got those visuals of the pyre, her body being forcefully burnt at the dead of night. And that really, changed public perception, emotions around that story. And it mattered that India Today had it, even though she put it up on Twitter first. But still. So you can't discount how important it is to have a functioning mainstream media. I think that's very important. Even in a Manipur, you had most media organizations from May 3rd, the violence broke out. And I think we had the viral video from Manipur come out on July 19th. In this time period, you did not have some of the biggest names in journalism like Arnab Goswami do a single debate on it. Anjana, I think she did 0 debates on it. Sudhir maybe did 1 debate on it. This was not a point of conversation. The fact that sexual assault had occurred during this spate of violence was first reported by print, digital news organization. The viral video comes out, and digital news organization again, Scroll, was the first to authenticate it, verify it, speak to the women in it, and tell the world that, look, this had happened. This is not an unsubstantiated kind of a viral video. And that very night, these guys, TV was still on Seema Haider. News Laundry broke the story on how the National Commission of Women had been sitting on this complaint for 38 days. It's another thing that India Today then carried it as their own exclusive the next day. But what I'm trying to say is that we did set the agenda. But do I think the story would have become as big as it has today had the big channels not picked it up? What if we had a scenario where there was a complete blackout? I am not very confident that it would be a big issue. And I'm not very confident if the opposition would have been able to corner the government in the way that it can today to respond on it, had there not been mainstream media also picking up the issue. So it is important. I feel extremely hopeless when I watch television news and mainstream news, and I'm talking about TV news again and again because that has maximum power. Those are the guys who really kind of have maximum hold over the people. And we know statistically that, again, that was a CSDS survey, that most people traditionally are still tuning on to television news for the news. So it's very important for them to carry on whatever little journalism they do. And I think as media critique, people who do media critique, as news consumers, you need to, irrespective of, there's this one, of course, the economic angle to it, the conflict of interest angle to it, the fact that bhai hame TRP chahiye, ad chahiye, to सीमा हैदर कोई दिखा के आएगा तो हम वो दिखाते रहेंगे, वो सब अलग है. But somewhere, as a democracy, as news consumers, as active news consumers, we need to, in whatever way we can, push these guys to also do what they're supposed to be doing and keep shaming them, keep questioning them. That's where TV nuisance comes in. Abhinandan and I often, we have these conversations in office, and he's of the opinion ki sab barbad hona chahiye. Let the rot just rot. Like he said, he has this thing that TV was terrible. I'm talking about entertainment. It was just dishing out crap. So it has to die, and people move to OTT and start going for, which may not be true because you have a big boss, which is still, I guess, the most watched, Kapil Sharma's show, which is the most watched. But he's always been of this opinion that let them just collapse. And, whatever digital organizations can do should really push aggressively, capture the market that these guys are leaving out, because they are leaving out a sizable market. I feel I'm not that optimistic of a complete decimation of mainstream media. And I don't know if I want to use the word optimistic, because I still have a lot of friends working there. I know there's a lot of good journalism that happens there too. So I do want them to thrive in some ways. But I don't have the answer, but I think it's important for India at this point to get these guys to also do their job, because it is important, purely because of the reach they have. So whether it is by shaming them, whether it is by tuning off, or whether it's by just, pushing for, demanding better news. And I often say this to people sometimes when I'm called to colleges or for talks, that just don't stop being passive consumers. Just participate. It's time we participate with news and what we're getting in the name of news. We have a role and we can change things. So I think that's, to sound very politician-like. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my thought on the current media landscape. I'm very happy with what digital does, but I just know the whole mainstream has, and it has to do better.
No, that's very inspiring. I mean, it'll sound like a broken record because I just keep thinking more power to you guys. I just, love what people like you do. You'd mentioned earlier that the beats are dying, of course. And I'm thinking that that's actually part of an illustrative of a larger structural change that really has nothing to do with politics and more to do with technology and the changing times, which is that, number one, back in the day, let's say the 1990s, mainstream media dominates everything. People like you and me don't have the tools of production unless we are working for a mainstream house. And there is a consensus on the truth. It's a broad consensus. Frontline may be a little left, somebody else may be a little right, but broadly there's a consensus, and you aren't going down the sort of Sushant Singh Rajput, Riya Chakravarti kind of madness is nowhere near happening. Now, not only has that completely collapsed, where no longer do we have a consensus on the truth, that there are many different kinds of creators, which I think is a fantastic thing because that's why I exist. But part of what that also does is it changes everything into narrative battles. But also, the way that people consume information is changing. Like when I think of myself, 20 years ago, I'm picking up a newspaper, and the newspaper is a package. That's how I get my news. And it has its news pages, it has its opinion pages, it's got sports, it's got everything. And there, the beats fit in. So all the beats are also there,
Yeah.
and it's a full package. And an editor's job is really of being a curator of reality for me, and incredibly important job at that point in time. Today it has completely broken down. Like I stopped getting newspapers at home after COVID, and I realized it was out of inertia. I'd been getting them at all. I didn't bother. I don't watch any television. So
So where do you get your
I consume everything in a very piecemeal way, which is, either it's online or I'll be clicking on links that I find on Twitter and social media. And I think a lot of people do that. Even people who still get physical newspapers are not actually consuming the package anymore. And perhaps they weren't earlier.
Absolutely.
Perhaps they weren't earlier, but there was an illusion that this is a package it's worth putting together. But today, a lot of things happen in a kind of a piecemeal way, and you will consume only one kind of thing. The way we discover content, consume content, everything has changed completely. What is your sense of this? Because I'm imagining that even the way that you consume your news today would have changed a lot from back in the day. And similarly, the imperatives of an editor also change, because I'm thinking if I'm an editor in that time, I am thinking like a curator, I'm thinking of the overall package. Today, I'm not really doing that. And I don't know what an editor today thinks of in a typical publication. That are you just trying to maximize your chance for virality or something going out there? What are the imperatives? What are the incentives? It's all, fuzzy to me. So tell me how you think of all of this, both as a consumer and an editor.
So I think for big newspapers, it largely is still the same in terms of the beats pretty much exist, except there's less importance of on a scoop or on an investigation, purely also because access has really dried out. That's what most people say, that you can't get the kind of stories that you did. Very few, I think, beat reporters who are really on it are able to kind of get those stories out, get people talking. Yeah, so as a news consumer, look, I still read the paper, and I still, because I'm also an editor, so I need to keep in touch with what's happening. I only thing that has happened, I think, maybe is that I have lost, and that is maybe because of my TV viewing, the amount of television I watch, and that's had some impact on me. I've become very impatient with reading the full story, so I do see myself tuning out after the first two paragraphs. That happens a lot. But as an editor, look, for us, we have taken this conscious call of the fact that we are not going to be able to compete with the Times of India or an Indian Express. They have bureaus, they have large offices, reporters on ground everywhere, and there's no point for us to break news. So that immediately frees us up from having to react to something very quickly. We have also, on the issue of getting the hits, we've also realized that, okay, we simply don't have an ad model. So this is something we want to be conscious about, whether being read or not, whether we are relevant or not, because ultimately you're also not writing for your parents to read. You want to reach out to people, you want people to be consuming you, be impacted by you. So we have those conversations on our relevance, but we've never had conversations on how much we need to hit, how many stories need to viral. We're conscious of what's working, what's not working for us. But because we have chosen this model of solely relying on subscriptions, for us, it really matters how we can pick up a story and really do it in a way that our subscribers find useful. Even with our news show, we have like NL Hafta, which is a weekly podcast. It's just a weekly podcast on the news of the week. So it's not like a daily, we're not bogged down by putting out daily opinion on what the India coalition means, or what the Prime Minister said outside Parliament, so stuff like that. So there's no need to immediately react to everything. But that's a very specific model of ours, and it's immensely freeing for our reporters and for everyone. As an editor, I think what I genuinely look at with stories, one, we have an aim of talking about the media. So that is an immediately clear goal for us, that we need to be doing stories on the media, more and more stories on the media, not just where they're failing, but also really looking at structures, at ownership, at personalities, at news events, how the media shaped your perception around a news event. So that's an immediate goal for us. And when we look at the larger, you're talking about curation, we don't want to enter a space which is already exhausted, because we know there's lots of people talking about a lot of things. So even if a Manipur is happening, we went after 2.5 months where we thought, okay, now we can go, and these are a bunch of stories that we can report on. And also sometimes it's also because our subscribers want us to do certain things, and they feel like, okay, this is a report that you should be doing. Video is a huge push for us. We want to be able to, sometimes stories are out, but seeing something visually. And this is where I think is really sad, the demise of television news, because the way video can have impact on you, it's unparalleled. Like I said, the Hathras story, without those visuals of that pyre burning, you wouldn't have had the outrage that case had, or even sadly in the Manipur case. And we had a lot of discussions around it. How much of, do you use a screenshot of the video or not? You don't have the consent of the women in it. It is traumatic for women to relive that and to see it play. Lots of ethical questions around that. But had that video not come out, you wouldn't have. So for us also, another important thing for me as an editor is how interesting can a story be on video, and what can it tell you through video? How can it jolt you? Because we know about tomato prices, right? But I don't know if you watched this Lallan Top clip of this poor vegetable seller, and he's
I
talking
saw that,
to the
heartbreaking.
report. It's heartbreaking. And I think this is one video in recent time that I can think of that everyone was moved by it. No, you could be the biggest bhakt, whatever, in that little Twitter world that we, label everyone or whatever. Everyone was moved by it. We know tomato prices. We know it's been hard. But just that silence of that man, the sheer indignity of what he was going through at that point, the helplessness, that's a video story. It couldn't have come out. You could have written 2,000 words on it, but it wouldn't have impacted you in the way that, short clip with that silence impacted you. So I think for me also, I've also taken to it pretty recently. I often have these conversations with our reporters on what can be a good visual, a good video. What can we know something is happening, but what can we tell through the story of one person? I think Barkha actually had a very interesting intervention on this. She had interviewed her a while ago when I was asking her, like, what makes a video story great? And she said that it is always that one story, the days of telling, macro stories are kind of over. You have to tell that one story through which you tell your audience about something bigger. So that really fascinates me about storytelling today as an editor. I mean, that's what I like to watch, and that's what I like to push people towards. The flip side of it, though, is that a lot of reporters in this scenario can just chase virality. I know that's happening to a lot of young reporters also, because this Lallan Top video goes viral. You're envious of that one reporter who was able to get that viral bite. And often you don't know the damage that you can inflict on someone with your virality. And I'm very conscious of that, because I had spoken to one of an NGO in Delhi that works with the homeless. And there was one story that really went viral during COVID. And a lot of people wanted to help this little boy out. I think he'd lost his parent. And there was a really moving picture of him on the near the pyre or something like that. And a lot of money came in. And that instantly kind of got everyone around the little boy very jealous. Because you're all in desperate, poor circumstances. One person goes viral, suddenly gets money, suddenly there are lakhs pouring in. People want to give him a house, people want to give him, fund his education. And that can impact those relationships that he has at his level in a very scary way, in a way that they cannot manage. And that is something that this kind of journalism can sometimes inflict on your subject that's going viral. So I think that also it's interesting to think of that sometimes, because sometimes you have the most greatest video clip with the most amazing interview. And I remember when we were in West Bengal, we were talking to this one girl, very young student, very articulate, young Muslim girl. And she just talked about being bullied in school because they would tell her that your food smells, what you get in your tiffin smells. And we were very worried about, because she's telling us earnestly everything that she feels like, and we know that this would be instantly watched and picked up by a lot of people, cut, snipped, put out there, outrage cycle. And I was just worried about what will happen to her the next day when she goes to school, and if her classmates who bully her have seen that video. So those are the questions that I think this kind of journalism that I feel is very impactful today can do to your subject. And also, sometimes also feel it numbs you because you move from one sad story to the other, to the other, to the other, and you really don't understand what the whole thing is all about. So those deep dive reports are also important. The traditional journalism of really getting, you know, it's fine. You saw a moving story of someone crying, but what is behind that price rise? Those are still important stories to tell.
No, and Barkha's insight is absolutely spot on because there's something, I mean, it's standard writing advice, show, don't tell.
Yeah.
You privilege the concrete over the abstract. We can talk as much as we want in lofty language about the migrant crisis of, during COVID, but you show that one image of the woman pulling a ill husband on a suitcase or whatever that image was on the highway, and that one image completely destroys anyone watching it and has that kind of impact, which is so powerful. I want to double in on what you kind of said about your having to then make editorial calls when ethical questions pop up. Because, and that ethical question is, of course, ever present in the sense that everyone you're writing about, they are a means to your end of getting a great story out there, but they are also an end in themselves as human beings, and shit could be happening to them. And you gave some examples of how you've got to think kind of carefully about that. And how does one do that? Do you go on a case by case basis on instinct? Do you have some kind of normative line that this is how far we'll go but no further? How does one navigate all of that? Because like I used to find sting operations incredibly unethical because you're really kind of getting them by deception. And to me, the end doesn't justify the means matter. But at the same time, if the end is something like incredibly huge, then you can justify doing that. If you're going to, for example, find out that, okay, these are the specific rioters who did this and they're admitting to it on camera, then yeah, in that larger public interest, it may be justified. And this is kind of maybe a clear-cut example, but on a daily basis, I'm sure you must be facing, dilemmas of this sort. And I guess a related question also would be, you use the term outrage cycle. And there is, especially on social media, a lot of outrage for the sake of outrage. It's all about, posturing how much you care and how empathetic you are and all of that. And I feel like it can also become a bit of a trap catering to the outrage cycle.
Absolutely.
So sort of, and that can equally then lead into the ethical questions where you could be using people as fodder for stories to cater to that outrage cycle, because that is what gets you virality and makes you feel relevant and important. So how do you think about all of this as an editor?
So yeah, ethical questions, I think it's on a case to case basis. That's how we really kind of, so one thing, in fact, that's something that I can, because it's fresh in my mind. Our reporters are in Manipur currently, and they met two families. They had two kids, a boy and a girl, 17 both of them, and I think they were both girlfriend and boyfriend and dating, and they disappeared during the time of when this violence broke out, and they still don't know where they are. It's been a month and a half. First, they thought they probably eloped together, so they filed an FIR against the boy that he's abducted her and all. But then the family sat down together and pieced the events and figured out that, okay, no, something has happened during this violence and they've gone missing. The same case that I was talking about earlier, that the police can't investigate. So we got the story. They spoke to the family, fears around it. And then they went to the police and they said, Manisha, we spoke to the family. The police has confirmed that they're no more. To me, to break the story on children's deaths without the parents knowing it, I just was very uncomfortable with it. And then for a minute and we've never faced such a situation where the police are, and you don't have internet there, there's not better connectivity, and also there's a communication lag. So I said, I think maybe you should call the parents and say that, the police has told you that they're no more. But then the reporter wasn't very comfortable with that because, like, how can we do this? How do we call them? We don't know. And it's also not your job, right, to be the communicator between the police and the parents. And I was like, okay, I'm very uncomfortable with doing the story and saying that they're no more when the parents don't know. I don't want to break that story no matter what, because it may seem like something that's very alarming and it presents a lot of, it's a very clear picture of what's happening there, but I don't want to be the person to kind of put it out. Maybe we should wait for the police to tell them. Then we did wait. We waited for the evening, and then we found out that the police had communicated that they're feared dead. Though to us, they had clearly said that we don't think, all we need is now the army to kind of confirm this. And in the middle of this, there were some viral videos doing the rounds from Myanmar, a very gruesome killing of a girl from Myanmar, which the parents felt could be the video of their daughter. And some media organizations put it out saying that they were suspecting the viral video to be the daughter. We completely refrained from, if you cannot at this point in time confirm, no matter what the parents are saying, what it is, we're not putting in it. So yeah, so that's a case to case basis. And again, it's an issue where you felt that should the journalist be breaking the news of, and again, it depends from story to story, right? Like, what if this was a high profile, I don't know, politician or an actor, and they were feared dead, and you went there and the police said yes, but the family didn't know, but the stakes are so high that maybe you run with that story because everyone's thinking, what's happened to this high profile person, and so you want to break that. There's that urge to break it. So it changes again. I'm sure the same circumstances around a different story, maybe we'd come up with something different. I remember during COVID, we had one video where I think it was, I forget completely the details, but it was a family, and I think the elder parent was unwell, and they were kind of dragging them from hospital to hospital to hospital on a cart and couldn't. And our reporters kind of followed them through that. And there were these questions of why didn't you help, or why didn't you? And they did, but in whatever way they could. And that was such a circumstance at that point that they couldn't really do much beyond offering a ride. And but I think one scene I remember in it, that the person who was being carried, at one point, his whatever he was wearing, was it a dhoti or something? And it kind of put him in a very disheveled kind of undignified kind of a thing, which works as a visual, but I was very uncomfortable with it. So we decided that, it went up, but then we kind of put it down and cut it, because you sometimes put yourself in your position. Like, what if my father was being ferried from one hospital to the other, and then he was in this condition which he doesn't have full control over, and if there were cameras taking pictures of how his how his clothes fell off or whatever, I would be very uncomfortable. So sometimes you put yourself in that position. But I think the good thing for us is, because we're not so consumed by being viral and being getting hits, we are able to kind of, as a newsroom, really sometimes pause and just think. Doesn't mean we're lazy or that we just sit on a story, but we have the luxury to kind of just sometimes, not a luxury I'd say, but we feel it's important for us to be responsible in a lot of stories, like the Manipur story I was talking about. Also because we critique the media. So news laundry, everyone's watching. Ki ye kab fuck up karenge. And we owe it also, because we, not that we are above critique. We love to be critiqued and we love to be criticized. But because we ask those questions of the media, we also have to be very careful while we're reporting. I think this Manipur case also, just to go on this, there was a conversation that I was having with another reporter on Scroll on how do you report on rape. Because the two communities right now, there's just so much hate and suspicion that there are also accusations just because you want to be the victim in the story. So there would be a lot of people who would say, yes, we know of women who've been raped. We know of people, of the mob doing this to our people. How do you then go about, because there's just allegations flying thick and fast, and it could be a very, exciting story, because, when one thing's viral, everyone wants to replicate that viral story of, in this case, gruesomely sexual abuse, but you want to get more and more stories on that because that's what's getting the attention right now. And just classic stuff that we were thinking of, that what we told our reporters, that you need an FIR, you need a police complaint, you need witnesses, even in a case of rape. My big problem with Me Too movement and also how that played out was because it's not just enough accusations. You owe it to the victim to do justice to their story by doing your job as a journalist. So triangulating something, getting that complaint out, finding witnesses, very important. So yeah, those are the kind of conversations we have often on ethics and how do you do a story.
Have you seen a film called Cannibal Holocaust?
No.
So it's a great horror film of the 1970s. I wrote a column on it. I'll link from the show notes. And it's like a lost footage film. So basically the central conceit of the film is that the filmmakers have found some footage and they're looking through it. And the footage basically is this bunch of documentary filmmakers who are going through jungle somewhere or the other where there are cannibals, and they want to make a sensational documentary which will go as viral or whatever that means in the 70s. And so they do things like they want to show huts on fire. So they put some tribals in huts and they set the huts on fire, and these people are of course burnt alive, but they've got great footage. And then eventually through the film they start getting hunted down by the cannibals. So it's like there are two of them and a third one has been caught and is being murdered, or I think testicles chopped off or whatever, and this guy tells the other guy, keep it rolling. And one by one, as they're picked up and attacked, they keep the camera rolling. And then in the end, the last guy is filming the second last guy going, and at one point the cannibal looks at him and you know that he's been seen, and they come and they get him and the camera's on the ground. And you just wonder
Wow,
that
I have to watch this.
yeah, and you just wonder at what point does that last person realize that this is not a documentary, that this is life and this is a real world, right? And it's, to me, it's just like a lot of horror cinema. It's a great commentary on life and society, and just kind of sums up, the madness of the modern world. And I want to ask you about that because you spend a lot of time engrossed in the madness of the modern world. I know it's your job, but you watch news television all the time, right, for nuisance. And I can't grok why the stuff that is happening there has happened. You've used phrases like bloodlust TV. You referred to something as Peoply Live multiplied by 10. You've in detail dissected shit like the SSR conspiracy nonsense that was happening. And I can understand at some level, right, you want to be sensational, and at some level, catering to hatred is much easier and can rouse people more than catering to, nuance and truth and subtlety. But it's just gone into a whole different area. Like, I couldn't take my eyes off this montage you guys did where Arnab Goswami is doing I.N.D.I.A. whatever.
And he gets it wrong towards the end. He goes I.D.I.
Yeah. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? This is madness. I could not have, 10 years ago, you show me this shit as parody, I would have said, no fucking way, no one can be that mad.
And you know what I dislike about this is what journalists have this convenient thing of saying that, अरे लोग चाहते हैं तो हम दिखा रहे हैं. That's like a drug peddler saying, अरे लोगों को drugs चाहिए तो मैं बेच रहा हूँ. भाई, you have decided to be a journalist. Yes, there will always be more people who are interested in Temur or Kim Kardashian or, salacious, sensational stuff. But you have decided to be a journalist, so stick to what you are supposed to be doing. No, I mean, some modicum of what, and it's crazy. I mean, I was telling a colleague on WhatsApp just before that, the Seema Haider story, I don't know, I mean, none of your listeners should go down this black hole of what's happening with
The first I heard of her was when I saw your videos, and I hadn't heard of her before that.
It is mad how it has consumed the news world, especially Hindi television, and they're raking in 29 million hits, 30 million hits, and just crazy kind of clickbait. So you've literally had thumbnails where they're saying that, so your audience knows who Seema Haider is, I'm guessing. If not, then she's this lady from Pakistan who's come because she's fallen in love with this guy while playing PUBG and she's living with him right now. Now the big question is that how did she cross over without any papers and quote unquote illegally? So anyway, that's the long and short of it. Interesting story. I would say it's a news story because it's just she's come with 4 children and she's taken this huge leap of faith to follow her love, and she met him while playing PUBG. But anyway, beyond that, that's that, right? And you have thumbnails right now which are saying that Seema Haider ने बता दिया कि कहाँ प्लान कर रही थी टेरर अटैक.
Wow.
अब वो नहीं, सच ही नहीं है वो, बट वो है थंबनेल और वो व्हेन यू क्लिक ऑन इट इट्स जस्ट नथिंग एट ऑल. सीमा हैदर वापस जा रही है, सचिन फूट फूट के रोया, सीमा हैदर ने जहर पिला दिया सचिन को. आई मीन, एंड दिस इज नॉट, आई मीन, फॉरगेट बैड जर्नलिज्म अमित, दिस इज जस्ट fiction which mainstream news channels, Republic, India TV, Z, Aaj Tak, सीमा हैदर ने पी बीड़ी तो सचिन ने की उसकी धुनाई, which is, and can you imagine, like, you're using words like dhunai.
Can I ask you a question? I'm sure you know. Did Seema Haider kill Sushant Singh Rajput?
I think that's that you hit gold with that thumbnail. I think that's going to be that's going to be like 100 million. And that's all. And I'm thinking that, okay, this is not even sensational journalism. This is just something beyond. It's not even absurd. I really don't have no words to describe it, because what you're putting out is total lies on a news channel. It's the clickbait of the worst kind. You click on the video and there's no such thing. And too comically and absurdly, because someone like Anurag Kashyap has to make a movie on, Indian media. I think there's just so much dark comedy out here. But the couple has now put up a board outside their house, ki media, please respect our privacy. The couple is actually fed up now with everything that's happening. It's come to this, that they've put up a board saying, please respect our privacy and don't. It takes them totally powerless. I don't think he's working. This woman who's come from nowhere, live in this, shanty little, place, telling media ki bhai respect our privacy.
It's actually...
It's just...
It's a remarkable love story though. Like,
it is.
PUBG brought them together.
And she's done this crazy journey, which so that's what I'm saying. I get it why you want to do that story. And yeah, it was a newspaper story too. It's quite an odd. She's also quite a fascinating character, because she's a very outspoken woman. She's really made for TV also, because she really speaks and she really emotes. So she's that television character. I think the next thing for her would be Bigg Boss. I would not be surprised if the Bigg Boss house calls her Sony. Okay, this is a sensational part of it. When we look at the more toxic hate, mainstream anchors talking about thuk jihad, the fact there's a conspiracy that Muslims are spitting in your food. For what reason, one doesn't know. But they're doing that. So beware of a vegetable vendor who's Muslim. Beware of a restaurant which has a Muslim chef or Muslim waiters, because they could be spitting in your food. That is grotesque. And I can't even... And to me, it's not business. I do think a lot of these anchors genuinely believe in what they're saying. Some of them may be crafty. I think, for example, Arnab, I think he's just a good businessman. He knows what sells and he's selling it. To his credit, he doesn't do thuk jihad kind of stuff. But he also went down that route, beach mein. I don't know what happened to him. I think maybe the jail term kind of changed things. But, when Hathras was happening, I remember very clearly him saying that this is a love story gone wrong. Brutal rape case, the woman is no more, she's dead, to me, this is not even... When people say and people get upset कि आप NDTV के बारे में क्यों नहीं बोल रहे हो? But like, भाई, NDTV नहीं करता था ये. Even if they were, soft towards the UPA, they didn't challenge Manmohan, they didn't challenge Sonia Gandhi. Okay, the interviews were a bit fluffy. Fine, you want to question them for their elitism, whatever. But they weren't doing this. It is not about hyper-partisanship anymore. I expect TV to be partisan. I think that's the natural route that Talk TV is going to take. When you don't have much ground reporting and all you're going to do is 8 to 10 o'clock debate shows, it's going to go down that partisan, hyper-partisan route. Maybe that is just the outcome. But this is not even that. It's hate. It's mistrust. It's lies. Complete dehumanization of minorities. Using, and we were talking about Sudha Bhardwaj, while we were taking a break. The frenzy around her, or the campaign to put her behind bars, started on Republic. She was dubbed an Naxal on Republic. Umar Khalid, dubbed terrorist on TV news channels. Ria, before her arrest, called this, nailed for her conspiracy or whatever. So television news now, the problem is not hyperpartisanship or political ideology. It's that they're actively anti-people. They actively whip up frenzy campaigns that land people in jail, that land people that, put their freedom in jeopardy. Shaheen Bagh, farmers movement, you may disagree with the bill, how they protested against it. You may be for the bill, argue for it, that's fine. I'm not even saying that you need to be necessarily with the farmers, or that should be the journalistic approach. But to say कि खालिस्तानी है सारे जो यहाँ पे आ गए हैं, to say कि ये ISIS, really funny, Shaheen Bagh, this woman had told me, because at that time they were running this thing कि इनको free की बिरयानी मिल रही है. तो यहाँ पे तभी आए हैं 500 रुपए और फ्री की बिरयानी. एंड द विमेन वर लिविड. दे वर लाइक, यार हमको बिरयानी एक तो कोई डेलिकेसी नहीं है, ठीक है, हम हर रोज बिरयानी खाते हैं घर पे, तो हम बिरयानी के लिए नहीं आएंगे यहाँ पे. दिस इज नॉट सम बिग थिंग दैट इज बीइंग ऑफर्ड. एंड आई कुड लिटरली सी the difference, because Shaheen Bagh, we went first in the beginning and then we went towards the end. In the beginning, people were very welcoming. They wanted us to come. They wanted to talk in front of the camera. When we went after 2 weeks, they were pissed and angry. And even I got heckled. Even I was told to shut my camera off because they were very scared of what bite I'm going to take, how I will turn it against them. Am I going to make them seem like they're jihadis? Will I say they're ISIS, ISI agents? And that mistrust against the media, where you feel the media is out to get you, anchors do it all night. But the kind of difficulty that creates for journalists or reporters, even from those very channels who may not necessarily want to do all of this shit, they want to just go and maybe report, do a simple story, if not challenge authority, just do a basic factual story. Their lives are made very difficult now because of what's happening. And you have this strange expectation, and it's bad, I think, also from the point of view that now the protesters also then said that you tell our story. Now, even if you want to challenge them in whatever little way or question them, that was perceived as negative. In farmers' protest also. So that's a very dangerous place to be in, where large number of people want even the media to be divided. And it's not their fault, because they are at the receiving end of all the hate that's coming their way. But now they want you to choose sides. Now a lot of times when you go on the ground, they will say कि आप गोदी मीडिया हो या गोदी मीडिया नहीं हो. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट इवन और नहीं हो तो फिर जो हम कह रहे हैं वही दिखाओ. तो अब दोनों साइड से लाइंस इतनी स्ट्रांग हो गई हैं that there's no space for a reporter to go and explore a story.
And when I think of someone like Arnab, it strikes me that he gave up journalism a long time back. Though once he was reasonable. I used to come on his show, I think circa 2008, 2009, and he seemed normal at that time.
Siddharth Varadarajan used to come on his show. Hartosh used to come on his show. I remember I was telling you in journalism school, 2611, we were glued to Arnab. We were watching him outrage for the entire nation, and he was asking tough questions, and he was there in the studio. He kind of took on people in this way that you wanted to at that time, You wanted those questions to be asked of UPA. And yeah, he was reasonable. And
I think what happened was you adopt a persona for a particular purpose, and then
you believe in it.
You double down on it. You become a performance artist, and then that persona becomes you.
Yeah, then you can't distinguish.
And you lose all your humanity. Right, which seems to have happened to a lot of these guys.
You believe in the myth of your own self, basically.
Yeah, and
the voice of the nation.
And I can get the whole toxicity in the politics bit. That is easier for me to understand. What I don't understand is some of what happened during the SSR thing and the way they went after Ria. I completely don't get it. And some of the one of the most popular conspiracy theories on Twitter, which is still my favorite, so I'm going to tell listeners about it, is that SSR was apparently into some particular kind of quantum physics where you can split an atom in half. So the theory was he had split himself into half, and it was a duplicate SSR who died, and the real SSR was in hiding from Adityanath, who wanted the recipe for the COVID vaccine for which he had apparently invented. This was one kind of crazy theory, and I'm just wondering, and you of course you are in a sense a chronicler of madness, if I may call you that. I'm curious about the why. Itna extreme kyun? Itna pagal kyun? Matlab hua kya? I can understand, fine, you feel there is a constituency for the hatred and the anti-Muslim stuff and all of that, and you go down that road, and that is despicable, but I get it. But a lot of this stuff is just surreal and bizarre, and I don't even know what's going on. It's just...
So I think I've divided when it comes to anchors. I think there's one bit that is truly that, we know famously Indian newsrooms are upper caste Hindus. Finally, they're able to express in a way that they couldn't earlier. They held these views, but now it's cool to do it. You can do it. And not only do you get access to the who's who in the Modi cabinet with this art of yours, you become relevant, and you also get watched, and you become relevant within a television news space. So I think there's that. I think a lot of people are also just talentless hacks. If I think of, say, a Rahul Shivshankar, who was with the NewsX, completely unwatchable. You would not even... Arnab, at least there's an entertainment quotient to it. So even if he's doing crap, you'd watch him because he's just entertaining. Rahul Shivshankar doesn't even have that. But how do you become relevant in this ecosystem? By just doing that, Modi ji, so much hua hai, kitna kiya hai, aur kya bacha hai, is famous. or just day in and day out taking, following the line, because that's how you are not going to rise because of talent anymore. I'm talking about the television news ecosystem. It's how much you can suck up between 7 to 10 p.m. And there's this hilarious uh, kind of a situation now where sometimes privately even BJP spokespersons say that yeah, anchors are going a bit too, इनने कुछ ज़्यादा ही बोल दिया. हम इतना भी नहीं बोलना चाहते थे. And you would have often BJP spokespersons just sitting quietly while the anchor is rambling on and on about how great Modi is or defending the Modi Sarkar, and the BJP spokesperson is like, हाँ, just on the side clapping. There's that. Of course, some people, I think with Arnab specifically, because I think he's in that way, he's really someone who started it all in terms of that, that loud, angry anchor. And it's great fun to watch him when you believe, when he's on your side, okay? For example, I think he's a very progressive stance on marital rape. So every time he speaks on marital rape, it's great. It's cathartic to watch because he's really taken down the naysayers, who are saying, no, it should not be. It is just a ghar ki baat. So he'll really take them down and you feel like, good, he's on the right side. And also, I think in issues with regard to women or LGBTQI issues, he'll really hammer everyone left, right and center. So he's I think one of the first anchors who've been very watchable and have really milked this whole outrage thing. But somewhere down the line, I think they realize that this is going to be the new reality, which is Modi. And he's a very different kind of a leader. Has not yet given a press conference. You can see, to my mind, now I have never met him and I don't know much, but from everything that I've seen of his interviews with people, the only time he treated someone like an equal at an interview was, I think, with Akshay Kumar, where he didn't have this contempt or distance. I think there he genuinely, you can see in the body language that he feels this is my equal, the superstar. With the rest of the journalists, he's so condescending. No matter how much you suck up to him, you
There's
ask
a
him.
photo of you with him. I thought you guys must be like thick as thieves, no?
Yeah, he did give me the Ramnath Goenka award in 2016. But no, not thick as thieves. But coming back to, so you can see the contempt on his face. No matter how much you say कि मोदी जी आप बटवा रखते हैं या नहीं, आप थकते क्यों नहीं. He's I don't think he's moved at all by flattery from journalists, because I think they've realized in their head that these guys just don't matter. They're just dispensable. The last thing we need to think of, journalism, media, whatever. And within that ecosystem, I think an Arnab has probably really gone. And now I think the problem is that they've gone so far that there's no coming back. Now you can only go down that road. Because that whole semblance of balance is such a distant word to even use for what's happening here. But you've gone so far down as to calling everyone tukre gang, anyone who's opposed as termites, literally using genocidal language sometimes of they need to be done away with, they need to be, locked up. That now I think there's no turning back. How do they turn back also? And I would, just for the fun of it, I'd like to at some point see this government change, and whenever that happens, to just see what these anchors do. I'd be really curious to know what they do. Like, do they flip or do they continue to go down that? Because whichever government's going to come next, I think they're going to be as belligerent with journalists. Because everyone's realized now, I think even with the opposition in states wherever it's, whether it's the Aam Aadmi Party or whether it's the TMC or whether it's, KCR, they want the media firmly in their control. No one wants an independent journalist now. You want to talk to people on your terms. And anyone who comes next at the center also will want that. So I'd really like to see what happens to all these anchors who've gone so far with their bhakti and their complete, not even crawling, I don't even know what the word is, that I'd really like to see how they change. Because the next government would also want the same sort of bhakti, if it's not the Modi government.
I was sorry about two people. I won't name them, but it's guessable. And they were both reputed to be on the pay of the ruling party. Okay. So circa
pre-2014?
Huh?
Pre-2014?
Post.
Okay.
Post 2014, this ruling party. I mean, it seems like, they've been around forever. So at one point, one of them stopped getting the payments. So these two were having an argument on demonetization, where this woman who's an economist was supporting demonetization, and this other gentleman was opposing it. And then apparently the head of the IT cell, from what I've heard, was changed, and the payments flipped. So the woman was no longer on the payroll, and she was barking mad anyway, and the guy was put back on the payroll. And the two continued arguing, but from opposite sides. And this was on Twitter, and I'll tell you who afterwards, and you might be able
I
to.
think I can guess the lady, but yeah.
You should be able to guess the guy also. But it was hilarious. It was surreal. And it was business as usual. It's like no one even noticed. And I was like, matlab, kya ho raha hai? Kyun ho raha hai? And then somebody told me, no, this is what happened. And, the payment system changed. But anyway, so
Well,
that's
news
what
anchor,
happened.
I don't know. I think the payment or this thing or the lucrative aspect of it is just that you get to really rise fast. The kind of people who are heading prime time, I can't imagine them.
I mean, the people
being
I'm
there.
referring to are seen as
More
like
like
public intellectuals. On
Public
the,
intellectuals, yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing.
But yeah, I think in newsrooms also, if you want to rise, that's what you're going to do now with TV. And why is it very depressing for young journalists who are joining television news industry? Because a lot of them do want to do TV. It is powerful. But what do you do? And it's not as if like a Times now doesn't have a reporter in Manipur. They do, and they had this reporter really question Biren Singh, but that went on Mirror now. So that this funny thing of Times now making a passing mention of it. No space in prime time, and Mirror now does a proper kind of a show on this. So yeah.
Tell me about what the journey at News Laundry has been through the years. Like, you've chosen a very different sort of financial model. Tell me a bit about that. Tell me about the challenges you faced. Have there been doubts? And what are your learnings along the way?
Yeah, I've been so long. I've keep joking that मैंने न्यूज़ लॉन्ड्री को उतना दिया है जितना मोदी जी ने देश को दिया है, because I've been with them since 2014 now. So
The highest praise Modi ji could receive, by the way, but continue.
So it was amazing. Yeah. When I joined, we were like 4 people sitting on a dining table in the basement of Sarvodaya Enclave. And Abhinandan had another company called Small Screen, which did shows, your listeners would know, travel shows and stuff like that. And we were basically being incubated or mooching off Small Screen. So we were just like 4 or 5 people, the News Laundry desk. And Small Screen was the big gig. And then, of course, we separated. And I think... started off as a reporter, and now I'm the managing editor there. So it's really been quite a journey. It's been phenomenal. Tiring also now. I think now I feel a bit, sometimes a bit tired also, because just the nature of startup, you can never, because you're in a small organization and you're constantly in the startup mode, you can never just be easy. You can't just be a cog in the wheel. And sometimes it's relaxing to be a cog in the wheel. Things will just happen anyway. The paper will come out whether you exist or not. That's not the case in smaller organizations. And I think that puts a lot of stress on a lot of people in the organization, because you just always have to give your best. Because otherwise it won't work. But I started off with being a reporter, reporting on the media. My first story actually landed us with a 100 crore notice from Rajat Sharma. It was quite funny. What's been amazing about News Laundry is the space that its founders, Abhinandan being one of them, have been able to create this newsroom where you're really allowed to be free. And I know a lot of people from the outside say कि left liberal हैं और ये तो इनका ये agenda है, whatever. But if only you could see the kind of arguments we have within the newsroom. And I think also what's happened that everything has moved so right that we appear quite left. And I think that's a different thing altogether. But starting off with 4 people, literally we were 4 people, and we would... I would report, I would edit my own story, I would put it up on the website, I would think of the artwork also, I'd coordinate with the person on social media to put it out also. So we were a really close, team, and I think those guys are still great friends, because I think for 1.5 years at least we were really small, 1.5, 2 years, and we really did everything together. And then we grew into this amazing organization. Now we're about 50 people. We're able to do, and initially I think we started off, even when I came in 2014, we were still this organization that was kind of being snarky at times, being funny, poking fun at people, pricking bubbles, also reporting. But a bigger part was critique, reporting on the media. would have the number of times as a media reporter, I've heard editors slam the phone on me and say, "We are not the story. And how dare you ask this question about, the complete lack of uh, openness of media professionals to talk about their own work or talk about what they were doing in the newsrooms was just quite amazing. And that's changed a lot to a point now where I think reporting on the media is very normal. Most organizations are doing it. It's very expected of editors to get calls on what happened on a certain story, why was a certain story pulled down, or what's happening with layoffs or whatever. But when we started off, it was incredibly hostile. Huh? The media industry was incredibly hostile towards us. Notices, of course, defamation, but also this like, who are you to ask us questions? Like, who, तुमको किसने बोला कि तुम यहाँ आके हमसे सवाल पूछो? That, of course, to now we're a full-fledged team that does quite a bit of reporting. And I don't know, in terms of learning, I've learned so much. It's really been, I've learned and unlearned so much. So video, I think, is one thing that I really learned here. Importance of communicating with your audience. I think one big thing, a lot of journalists, and this happens I see that sometimes in my friends also who are with the mainstream media, they put themselves on a pedestal. There is this tendency to talk down or to say we know better or that we'll tell you. I think with News Laundry, one of the things that I really learned was the importance of really talking to your audience, engaging with them, taking them very seriously, respecting them, communicating with them in a way that I wouldn't have had I been a traditional journalist. So yeah, those are the kind of learnings. And when I came in, look, as reporters, as journalists, and this is one of the worst things about us as a profession, and maybe that's why we are where we are, we don't like to think of money. And reporters take pride in it, journalists take pride in the fact कि हमें तो पता ही नहीं कि पैसे कैसे बनाते हैं या we are just involved in our own little thing. We don't think of business models on which we are surviving or what really drives the industry. We really have conversations on the business of media. I think News Laundry really opened me up to that because even with a small team, those conversations were really happening with our newsrooms. That what does it mean to be driven by ads? What is the fundamental problem of relying on advertisement? When can it go wrong? When can it go right? And then completely, I think late 2014, we had completely moved on to subscriptions. And back then, no one was talking about subscriptions. We were the only ones. It was, I think, laughed at ki why would on earth people pay for news, and then that to a news organization which is not like a Times of India or Indian Express. It's not catering to all your information needs that you may have in a day. You want to know about what's happening in your locality or whatever. So that has been a very interesting learning. What makes people pay for news? What makes them connect to you as a journalist? What are their concerns? What are the kind of communication that you need to do? We've had to, along the way, because we took on to subscriptions, really do a lot of communication in a fun way, in a classic News Laundry way, explaining to people why they need to pay for news. And that got us also thinking, me thinking especially on what happens when you have something as important as news, something which at its very core has to be driven by public interest. What happens when that is completely dependent on government advertising? And more so today, if you switch on television news, I don't think you will see Hero Honda or Tata ke ads. Yeah, what's that other really Hema Malini brand, which used to be all over the news, with the RO water. It's really famous brand that she'd come. That was all over on television.
You're asking completely the wrong person.
Or Patanjali, for example. Now you switch on, you'll see Chhattisgarh ad, AAP ad, पंजाब का ऐड आएगा, फिर भूपेश बघेल का ऐड आएगा, फिर योगी का ऐड आएगा. It is literally, government ads are keeping it going. And then how do you ask any sort of questions of those in power when you're completely dependent on them for your paycheck? So those conversations really opened me up as somebody who can think about journalism a little more than just the ideals of it,
And in this really interesting journey where you're trying out a new model, you're not going for advertising, you're going for subscribers, you're trying to figure out how content clicks. How do you maintain the balance? Because there's always a trade-off in the sense that you don't want to go too far towards looking for numbers and looking for all of that, because then you can lose the identity of what you're doing and you can forget your original purpose. But at the same time, you don't want to speak to 30 people. You do want
Yeah,
to reach a large
exactly.
audience. So what are the thoughts that kind of go into figuring that balance out? Like in a different context, what I tell my writing students about their writing is that you should never compromise on content, never dumb it down, but where you should think of the reader and cater to her is when you think of the form that she is getting it in, but the content is what it is. So is it something kind of similar for you? Do you sometimes face disquieting choices? Looking back, do you feel ki nahi ye nahi karna chahiye tha, or do you feel that hey, actually we could have done that? How have you navigated that space?
So, look, we're very clear about the fact that you want to have a large funnel, which is your discovery, and through that, you want to be able to convert, some people towards paying subscribers. So, everything that we put out is really geared towards that. Yes, we do some things for the numbers, and nuisance precisely is why we don't put it behind the paywall ever, because we know that this is a product that's just going to reach a lot of people. And our idea is to just communicate, get people to know that something like this exists, and then nudge them towards, hey, have you heard our podcast? Have you heard our interview? Have you read this ground report? Have you looked at the fact that, we have also gone to Manipur and got you important stories while the rest of the news has moved on to Seema Haider? Do you find value in this journalism? We are able to do this because we don't really care about, pleasing anyone in the government, because we are not dependent on advertisements for them. We can do this because subscribers. So you're introducing the notion of how freeing it can be when someone pays for news. So we have made that conscious decision that, shows like Nuisance or Tippani, which is a show by Atal Chaurasia, that's going to reach out to a large audience. And within that, we nudge people into some of our paywall stuff, or introduce them to the idea of a media that's daring to exist without any kind of government or corporate patronage. So that is very clear to us. There are sometimes we have confusions on whether you paywall a piece or not. That is the only time that we kind of sometimes have arguments on, or we have debates on. I'm usually always for don't paywall this story. It's very important. It should be read by everyone. And then, Raman, who's our editor-in-chief, will say, yes, but we do need, you do need to give your subscribers also something. They can't just, they also need to feel at the end of the day that there's a reason why we have a paywall, because there's something behind the paywall. You can't have nothing behind it. So those are the conversations we have sometimes. But again, it's a case-to-case thing. Something of deep public interest, for example, the story of the two teenagers that I spoke to you about Manipur, that's never going to be behind the paywall. It just needs to reach people. But maybe a profile of what's happening within Times Now as a newsroom, and where Navika Kumar sits, how she, places herself in that ecosystem, and what does that mean for journalism? That could be paywall, because we know enough people may want to pay, and it's a certain sort of audience that may be interested in it.
Navika also will have to subscribe to read
and
it.
I think that's what we keep joking about. I think half subscriptions are from Times Now office. Half of our, paywall subscriptions that have come on this piece are all Times Now guys. They want to know कि हमने लिखा क्या finally.
I was very amused when they sued you once for defaming their quote-unquote towering news personalities.
Towering news
You wrote a piece
personalities.
of that. It was hilarious.
And that case has gone nowhere. I think they stopped. The India Today case is still going on, where we are awaiting an order on that. So yeah, those discussions we have on should you be paywalling something or not, and what should you be paywalling.
And it may or may not apply to you, and you guys would have much more experience of it. But one of the interesting things I discovered is that there are people who will pay even if there is nothing behind the paywall.
Yeah.
That's what I found with people who voluntarily contribute to the show, though I don't advertise it at all. It's just a link on the website, but that actually keeps the show independent. And nothing is behind a paywall, and I've been very clear that nothing will ever be. And similarly, even on Substack, you have some newsletters that are thriving that will take their $100 a year, but everything will be a public post.
Absolutely.
So, and that is really heartening to me, because it means that, yeah, sure, people are used to news being free. Most people won't pay. But the people who want deep engagement and deep content and who value the kind of work that you guys do, they would actually pay regardless. They want to pay. They value this.
This makes me remember this really one, odd case in Gorakhpur. We were there for the UP elections, and all our reporting is funded by subscribers. So, of course, there's the regular subscriptions, but we routinely put out something called the NL Sena, which is a reporting project that we ask people to fund. So, for example, Manipur currently is a completely 100% funded by readers reporting gig. 3 reporters we've been able to send. They're there. They're going to be there for another 15 days. So similarly, our election coverage is completely funded by people. So we put up an NL Sena that these are the assembly elections. We're going to be traveling here. We're going to be telling you stories, and 100% funded. And we were able to travel all 5 states in 2022, early 2022. And we were in Gorakhpur, and a Muslim boy actually reached out to us and said that I have paid for your NL Sena and want you guys to come over to my house for breakfast. So we went and had breakfast, and I asked him, I want to know his feedback. Listen, you've paid for this NL Sena. Do you like our reporting? He said, मैं नहीं देखता. तो मैंने कहा, आप नहीं देखते हो? आपने तो पे करा है इसके लिए. He said, नहीं, मैं न्यूज़ ही नहीं देखता हूँ. बहुत डिप्रेस हो जाते हैं, तो मैं न्यूज़ नहीं देखता हूँ. और एक टाइम पे मैं रवीश कुमार देखता था, अब रवीश भी नहीं देखता हूँ क्योंकि बहुत डिप्रेस हो जाते हैं. अगेन दैट what we were talking about, Muslims watching news. I think for them, एक तरफ is right-wing hate, the other taraf is just despondency, doom, gloom, and it's terrible space to be stuck between.
It's self-preservation to switch off.
To switch off. But he said कि मैंने दिया क्योंकि मैं बस चाहता हूँ कि आप लोग करो और आप अच्छी स्टोरीज बताओगे और आप ट्रूथफुली बताओगे और कुछ अच्छा तो निकलेगा, तो फिर मैंने इसलिए पे करा. So you do get a lot of those people who just want to believe. And that's also because we've worked on our messaging a lot. Since we have early movers advantage since 2014, we've really been able to drill it into people's head why it's important. And our messaging is very pure. We aren't taking any advertisement. So then I think people kind of, it's not कि हम side में Google ad ले रहे हैं, YouTube से भी पैसा कमा रहे हैं और फिर पैसे भी मांग रहे हैं. We are genuinely ad free. So I think that also connects with people. But to me as a journalist, I feel a little uneasy when people just pay because they like you. I want it to be worth their time and while. And I feel like you want to give them something that makes them feel, I don't know, I just feel, maybe because when I subscribe to like a Netflix or, I don't know, to an Amazon, I want at least one good series out in a month.
That's not why people pay for it. That's not why people pay for this, don't you?
But I just feel, I know, and it's a completely different kind of a thing, but I feel maybe this kind of responsibility that if people are trusting you with their money, investing their money in you, then I need to give them something that they feel good, that was worth my money, even though that may not be their motivation at all.
I want to ask you now about video, because you've shared some insights about what you learned from video, and you've referred to how that's been a tremendous area of learning. And I want to ask you to elaborate more on what you have learned about the medium, because A, it's an incredibly powerful medium, and B, journalists of this new age now have to increasingly think in terms of that story that also has a visual component and so on and so forth. It's not just about pen and paper. So, share some of your learnings on video. And
biggest learning, I think, for me, what we were talking about earlier about authenticity, I think why a lot of television news reporting, also forget the anchoring or the primetime debates, even the reporting, some of it is not watchable because it's so affected. We've all learned how to talk in a certain way. Like when you see a reporter, और आप देख सकते हैं आपके पीछे आपको ये दिख रहा है और they'll keep rattling, even though पीछे कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. And Ravish really broke that with his Ravish ki reporting. I think he was one of the few journalists who really broke that thing. He was okay being silent. He was okay just laughing at something that's happened or let someone really go on and on. I think Lalan Top also today does that really well, some of the reporting that they do on ground. But one of the things that I have learned is you should be speaking the way you speak normally. And that's the first thing we tell all our reporters who, take to video first. Because, when you're talking on a podcast, suddenly you start going, you're going up and down and, you have this tone, which just doesn't work. So,
that's really nice. We should have done the whole conversation.
So I often tell reporters that, do you talk like this when you're talking to your friends? So why are you talking like this on a podcast? So I think that's one of the learnings that we have that, which of course I also learned the hard way by really screwing up, and Madhu would, call on the phone and say, how are you talking? Do you talk like this in normal life? And what is this way of... So one of the things that and especially for digital, now maybe I would look very clumsy on television, especially with, sometimes we laugh about how a nuisance, my hair is just all over the place. It's not nicely kind of, straightened. And maybe television with those studios demand that slickness. But with news laundry and this digital space we have, you can afford to be a little less sleek. You can, not be so affected when you're talking. Even when you're reporting, we often tell our reporters that if something is happening behind you, you don't need to say कि आप देख सकते हैं मेरे पीछे देखिए कितनी बाढ़ आई और वो आदमी डूब रहा है, वो लोगों को दिख रहा है. Say something beyond the visual, you know. And that's a lot of television journalism is just, आप देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे कितनी भीड़ है और यहाँ पे सीमा बाहर निकल आ रही है और वो उसने पिंक चुन्नी पहनी है और आप देख सकते हैं, because you're just filling time. And I think there's also a deeper psychology to it, that journalists always need to sound like they know things. And so when we're reporting, we never want to pause, or we never want to seem confused, or we never want to question sometimes about what's happening around us, because we always want to seem like that authority on something that's happening. We know everything. We know everything as it's happening. And we'll tell you, what to think about it. And that kind of journalism, I think the time for that journalism is over. People don't want to watch that. If something is happening and you're wondering what's happening, rather than putting out a mundane bite and repeating again and again on what you think is happening, you can just stand there and just look at what's happening and say, this is what seems to be happening, but I'm not really sure. We're going to go ask. So that has been my biggest learning. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of television news anchors also got really big, when they come onto digital, some of them don't work that well because they carry on that television language of speaking to an audience on video with them. And they aren't very watchable because that tone of, I'll tell you everything, stays with them. So yeah, for visual storytelling, for me, 2 rules is like, if it's happening in front of you, don't repeat it. People can see it. And it's hard to not do it, because we also, by watching so much of it, that's what we end up doing. And be authentic in the sense that you are also noting in whatever way you can. Doesn't mean that you start crying because something sad is happening behind you. But yeah, don't keep droning on something when you don't know what's happening. It's okay to pause. It's okay to,
There's a great observation I remember about the different visual forms and how they're different from each other. And let's say you go to a movie theater to watch a film. There's a certain distance between you and the screen, and there can be a similar distance between the camera and the actor. So you can have your outdoor chase scenes, your westerns, and all of that. If you're watching a television, it's like a couple of meters away from you. And similarly, there can be that much distance between the camera and the actor. So you have friends and Seinfeld and people in a cafe or people in a living room. And when you have YouTube, the viewer is really watching it from this close distance of less than a meter. It's right there. And similarly, for a lot of made for YouTube content, you have that distance between the camera and the anchor or whoever is speaking. And therefore, it leads to that kind of intimacy, and it demands that kind of intimacy. If you try to do projection the way you would on television or even, on a bigger screen, it simply will not work on this small screen. Yeah. And that is also that's also the difference between podcasting and radio. Radio is really broadcasting to larger audiences. And it's like, the metaphor I would use is, you're sitting in a car and 5 people are listening to the radio. Podcasting is a voice in your head. It's incredibly intimate. So this authenticity is like such a huge, important point for me.
Yeah. But again, how do you do it without giving into the drama of just creating a drama centered at you? So I think, because a lot of TV anchors do that, for example, which I find cringe to watch. Go into a place where a gruesome murder has happened and then sit with the family and start crying there yourself to create that drama, ki wo ro padi anchor, and then they'll put out that, which I think is cringe. So yeah, there's a fine balance between that also.
So my penultimate question for this day, and I'm so grateful you've given so much of your time for this, because God knows you have more important things to do and better content to create. But my penultimate question is really about, where do you think journalism is going, and what do you think are the best and worst case scenarios for journalism to evolve in India over the next 10 years? Because so much has happened in the last since you entered journalism in the late 2000s, and so much has happened since then. Where do you see it going? How hopeful are you? Earlier in the break we were speaking about Akar Patel, Tista Setalvad, Sudha Bhardwaj, who are so incredibly optimistic and hopeful despite undergoing everything that they have undergone. And are you sort of, and I think of myself as having pessimism of the intellect but optimism of the will. Like, I do think the world is going to hell, but I'll keep on doing whatever I'm doing. How do you think about this? What motivates you? And when you look ahead, give me a best case and a worst case scenario for journalism in India over the next 10 years.
Wow.
Worst case scenario is you're screaming on Times Now. Are you ever going to do it?
I really fear, and this is something I've been thinking of also of late, just in terms of, I'm really zooming out. I'm thinking of journalism as everything, not just what News Laundry does, but everything that is journalism. I really fear our irrelevance because of our unwillingness to adapt. And this takes us back to the initial conversation we had on influencers, content creators. I think at some level we have ceded space as journalists to these guys. And to the point that now there's a lot of confusion around even what really journalism is for a lot of viewers. So my fear is, and I'll give you a simple example, like when this whole Hindenburg report thing was happening, and the story broke, and even as a journalist, you look to Mint, you look to Economic Times, you look to Business Standard, there wasn't really a breakdown on what that report was. And financial influencers like this guy called Akshat Srivastav, he's pretty popular, YouTuber. He did a rather good video on just breaking down the basics of it. And I was like, why didn't someone in the Mint, Economic Times, or Business Standard newsroom do that? I would prefer that because I trust you guys. I know that there's some sort of editorial filters there. I know you have the expertise. So why won't you just talk to your audience and tell them about what's happening around them in a language that they understand? So I have a lot, and maybe that is why also we at News Laundry really try and push with form, because I'm really scared of people just there being a future where people simply don't see why journalism is important because it's just had no impact on them, or that it's not answering the questions that they have. So that's my worst case scenario, a scene where journalists are irrelevant because of this volley of information and content that's coming to you, and it's only going to increase, right, going ahead. Some fears with the nature of democracy, the fact that you have journalists with FIRs, you had the Siddiq Kappan in jail for so long, just because he was on his way to Hathras. Now, whatever you may think of his journalism, his ideology, his politics, he was just on his way to cover a news story, a spot. He was just on his way to do spot reporting. The most basic thing. He's not even a dissident. Forget going after someone who's a dissident. This is just a regular guy doing spot reporting. That fear, I have fears of that because it can only get more naked ahead, I think. Because once they've figured that there's power and that they can control the narrative. And then I think the thing with the bully is always, and the thing with someone who, especially what this government has gotten away with in terms of, how they've controlled the media narrative, is that you don't want it to slip even a little. So even a little bit of news will not be tolerated, and that's my fear. So when you look at television news, we critique them. I'm deeply disappointed in what they do, but there is that, okay, at least they spoke about Manipur. At least they, when this blew up, they talked about it, and whatever in their little way. Arnab also said BJP ko 2-3 usne questions pooch diye, sharam ke mare. I'm very scared of how further will that space keep shrinking, because once you have that narrative control, you want total narrative control. That's the nature of authoritarianism. It's not going to give you an inch. So that is my second fear. And my own fear, personal fear, which has got nothing to do with these big questions of what will journalism look like, is how long will I go on, in the sense that how tiring will it get after a point? Because we're, mid-career, I think all journalists go through this of why you're doing what you're doing, what have you really attained. You see also a lot of people around you leaving the profession. Uh, that CSDS report is fantastic, where it says most of them want to leave. Uh, I think journalism is also one of the few professions where um, the work that you do, uh, there's never really a direct correlation to your success. In that sense, if you're lucky, there is, but you could be fired in a year where you did the best story purely because they had to get rid of X number of people and you had the salary and you had to, be thrown out. So my own, worry about my own self is like, I hope I don't get tired. And if I don't get tired, then I hope I'm not boring. I think I also worry about just boring my audience with my own views about the world.
I'm afraid you're not remotely close to that yet, but I mean, don't get
I don't
tired.
want to be a drone who keeps saying कि यार नब ने ये कर दिया. No, we think about that now कि अब कितना करेंगे. ठीक है, 5 साल से बोल रहे हैं प्राइम टाइम में ये हो रहा है. अब कुछ और भी देते हैं. So we also think now that okay, let's just talk about something else also. So that was also something I'm very conscious about. I'm very hopeful about the good sense in people, even though I don't think I should be, and there's a lot of evidence against it. But I do still feel that people can think for themselves, and when they see something earnest and good, they do still react in good faith. It's not as polarized as we believe it is when we're on social media. You could have people vote a certain way, think a certain way, but sometimes when you really hit at basics, you'd be surprised how they'd agree with you. It's just a question of communicating in a way which doesn't polarize people further, especially when you're in the profession of journalism. So I do have a lot of hope from people. I do think good sense can prevail, especially from the younger people. I think above 60, TK, we don't want to get into that generation now. They've lived their life. They want to be on WhatsApp. They want to believe in certain things. Their prejudices. I'm not going to, this whole outrage around Sudha Murthy. Lots of questions around it. But I also feel that I'm not going to argue with my nani now on how to think. हो गया वो. I'm going to concentrate on the younger people. So I feel there's a lot of hope with younger people. There is a lot of information hunger that they have. They recognize how TV is failing them. They're also very discerning about, really funnily recently at one of our events, this young girl, college girl, walked up to me and she said, I had done a report on the Statue of Unity in Gujarat and how a lot of the tribals living in that area were very upset because a lot of land had gone towards creating this grand place. And a lot of promises were made that weren't fulfilled. There was a lot of anger around the Statue of Unity, and I'd done a sort of a piece on it. And she came to me and she said, I was watching it and I was waiting for you to, show your bias. Ki ab ye bias ho jayegi, ab ye bias ho jayegi. But you were very balanced. So I thought it was very funny that she was, while watching my report, she was also kind of waiting for me to slip up. And then she judged me and said, ठीक है, इसने दोनों sides से बता दिया जो जानना था. She wasn't going on a rant against the whole project. She was kind of giving us, the nuances of that. And I feel that's not a very bad sign among young people, that they are very skeptical of what they're watching. They're weighing you. They want to know, but they also don't want you to just tell you how to think about something. They want options. They want information based on which they want to make their own choices. And I think that's very exciting about young people. And that gives me hope. News consumers give me hope.
Fantastic. So the hope is young people, and we have plenty of them. So there is plenty of hope. Final question for me and my listeners. Recommend books, films, music that you absolutely love, that means the world to you. You love it so much, you want to share it with everyone.
Wow. Currently, I'm reading or...
Anything. Could be something that moved you when you were 10 years old.
Okay, so my reading journey has been really haphazard, and it's been really, started off with the classic Enid Blyton, Heidi, Beauty kind of thing, Agatha Christie, Nancy Drews, and the classics, Little Women and all that. And till a point where I, got done with all the classics and then got to plays. I think from my 10th standard onwards, maybe my 9th to my college, I got addicted to reading plays. And to the point that I became very impatient of the novel. I just didn't have the time for this grand setup of the beautiful sunset or 5 pages of, So I would highly recommend from that time, this play by Jean-Paul Sartre called Keen, Disorder and Genius. This play by Camus, Cross Purpose, and I have not read any of their books because I've probably read only the few plays that they've written because I was thoroughly impatient with novels. I think Oscar Wilde is, as a kid, I think he just made me laugh a lot. I think I loved reading all Oscar Wilde plays. A kid, as in a teenager, I thought, the way he could just laugh at a certain circumstance or get you to laugh. I think his plays are brilliant for that. Then after that, I read a lot of Indian plays also. I think Girish Karnad is fabulous. Vijay Tendulkar is fabulous. Girish Karnad, I think, just the fact that his plays are so deeply rooted in Indian tradition mythology, but yet it doesn't sound clunky because it's in English, and that's just marvelous. Because it could easily sound so caricaturish, but yeah, great. I think all of Girish Karnad's plays. Of late, I was talking about Abhishek Chaudhary's biography, which is great. I think it really makes you think about the rise of right wing in a very different way. And it really makes you think of it beyond just labeling it as something toxic or divisive, and really looks at the roots of where it's coming from. So recently, I really liked that. In terms of a book, back to my journey of reading, I think all of R.K. Narayan I loved. I think Guide is one of my favorite books. The movie's music was good, but the movie was crap. Poetry by Nida Fazli. I really like him. I think he's really good. Really spoke to me when I was young. And we were talking about Shivani before this, Mrinal Pande. There's a fabulous book by Ira Pande called Didi. As you know, we were talking about being in the army. I didn't have this sense of being rooted, but I think there is that sense of being a Kumauni, but I don't know the language and I had no like real cultural ties. So that book really kind of got me close to my own culture. So I find that also one of the most amazing books. Recent fictions, like I said, I've lost the patience to go through fiction. But I really liked Atish Tasir's The Way Things Were, one of the recent books. I mean, it's not recent, it's pretty old, but I think for me that was a really amazing book. And yeah, that's all I can think of. Anyone who wants to understand the madness of what's happening right now, I do think Abhishek's book is really good. And of course, classic V.S. Naipaul, Wounded Civilization, I think is a must read. He was talking about a lot of things back then that we are just opening our eyes to now. And he was raising a lot of questions. And of course, it's very well written. It's for journalists. It's a great read because it tells you. I don't know. Are you a fan? A lot of people also look down at Naipaul as just a very laborious writer.
I'm certainly a fan, and certainly of his prose style. I mean, he was such an elegant stylist,
and he was able to really some of the things that we talk about, like Ram Mandir, anxiety among Hindus, what Hindutva meant. I think I recently went back to it, and I was like, wow, this is like. This is talking about something that we're all grappling with today, but he wrote it back then. It was really something to be able to see it. Yeah, that's my short suggestion.
Thank you so much for your time today. This was such a great conversation. More power to you. And
Thank you.
Final thing. If listeners want to support News Laundry, subscribe to it, what's the URL? Where should they go?
You go to newslaundry.com/subscription. You can support us. Everything that we do, like I said, is completely ad-free. We're able to do everything thanks to, our subscribers. So subscribe and also check out some of our stuff. Maybe you can start with, if you're not a subscriber already, you can listen to some of our smaller podcasts that you'll find on our YouTube. If you like it, then maybe you can subscribe to NL Hafta, which is behind the paywall, and you may find it worth your time.
Take a quicker approach. Just subscribe to begin with. It is completely worth it. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Amit. That was great.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes that will support good journalism, support News Laundry. You can follow Manisha on Twitter at MNSHAP. I'll also link it from the show notes. Why you do this, Manisha? And you can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in. Thank you for listening.
Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.